Greetings from the Shigaraki family. Before the video begins, I am grateful to the original author for granting us permission to incorporate their work into our video. I am extremely grateful. The description contains the work of the original author. We will now proceed to the video. A Hero's Hunt by Bola 8. Izuku slowly opened his eyes. He was lying on the ground. His body felt as heavy as lead. As he slowly got up, he saw that he was now in front of a stairway that led to some type of hut. Looking at himself, he frowned in confusion. He was wearing some type of formal clothes, a dress shirt, trousers, and dress shoes, along suspenders that were flapping uselessly at his waist. He was starting to panic, but then it came back to him. An operation table. A man in a wheelchair. Blood. A dream. A beast. Fire. Fear. Confusion. Blood. Beast. Death. Izuku's breath was haggard. He felt the pain, but he was still alive. His heart hammering in his chest assured him. So why did he remember the claws of the beast tearing into his back, and the despair of drawing his last breath before being consumed by nothingness? A hand on his leg brought him back to reality. Looking down, he saw a pale and hunched figure. It was pulling on his pants, trying to draw his attention. Izuku's own panic made him stay still instead of jumping away from the small creature. It perceived that he was now focused on its ivory form and gave him what seemed to be a smile before pointing at the stairs. Izuku was uncertain of what the creature wanted. "You want me to go there?" He pointed at the construction in front of him. The creature nodded, and Izuku smiled at how happy it seemed to be. He could barely remember when someone was genuinely happy to talk to him, as since he was 4 years old, he was shunned by society as an outcast, a pariah, a DEKU. The soft tug in his leg stopped his dark train of thought. Izuku glanced at the creature once again before slowly walking ahead. He barely climbed the first step when more of the creatures sprung from the ground, making him jump with a startled yelp. He saw at least a dozen of the pale beings. Some slight difference aside, they were basically copies of each other. They were offering something to him. Izuku couldn't see what, as the mist from where they came from obscured the items, except for the wood handles that they were trying to pass to him. Confused but also curious, Izuku grabbed one of the handles and pulled. Izuku could only stare. In his hand was a curved saw, covered in bandages, but that was not the thing that got Izuku's attention. It was not the sharp edge or the sawed teeth, it was the smell, an aroma that grasped all of his mind and awoke something hungry. After a minute, Izuku got a hold of himself and saw that a note was attached to the bandages. Izuku took the yellowed and dirt paper and carefully lowered the weapon in his hand. Saw cleaver. One of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used in the hunting business. This saw, effective at drawing the blood of beasts, transforms into a long cleaver that makes use of centrifugal force. Izuku was both terrified and intrigued by the content of the note. Giving the weapon a more close inspection, Izuku saw a button on the wooden handle. His curiosity getting the best of him once more, he pressed it and with a satisfying click, the blade of the saw unfolded with a shower of sparks. The creatures applauded, making Izuku blush. He had actually forgotten about them. Pressing the button again, Izuku turned the weapon back into its more compact form and then used the suspender of his outfit to attach it to his HIB. The white creatures vanished back into the mist. Izuku took that as a sign and started to climb the stars once more. Just a couple steps and another group appeared, this time with 2 handles. Izuku was both intrigued and concerned of where they got whatever they were offering him. Taking another handle at random, he pulled, and immediately had to do a double take. In his hand was a gun, an old one, both in model and wear, as the strong smell of gunpowder attested. Izuku noticed 2 things. First, there was another note attached to the weapon. Second, his sense of smell was sharp, too sharp. He wouldn't normally be able to smell the compound, especially not as vividly as he was. How could he have suddenly got more accurate senses? A blood ministration. Pain. A dream. Pain. Power. Pain. You are one of us now. Izuku felt like his head was split in half, then forcibly hammered back together. His knuckles were holding the handle of the gun so hard they turned white. He couldn't breathe, it was too much, and in a second, it was over, disappearing like the morning mist. After a few minutes, Izuku's vision came back into focus, even if pained tears still fell from his eyes. He stopped and breathed, the rhythm helping him to center himself. He felt a tug. One of the creatures was holding the note, which probably had fallen after Izuku's panic attack. Taking it with a Thank you. What made the pale being full of apparent happiness? Izuku read the note. Hunter Blunderbuss, a blunderbuss created at the workshop for the hunter's line of work. Hunter firearms are specially crafted to employ quicksilver bullets fused with the wielder's own blood, boosting damage against beasts. Izuku paled. Not only were the bullets toxic, they were also mixed with blood, his blood. He gagged for a second. What person could possibly conceive the idea of these weapons was completely insane. The creatures vanished once more. Izuku slowly walked the steps, now afraid of who awaited him. His fear once again made him jump as another one of the beings appeared, this one alone. It offered him a simple and worn book. Izuku thanked the creature, who vanished with a joyful wave. Izuku didn't know if reading the book now was a good idea, so he secured it in one of his pockets and climbed the final steps. With a shaky breath, Izuku, clinging to the last of his courage, pushed the door. It was locked. With a deadpan, Izuku let out a sigh. He didn't know if it was one relief or annoyance. With one less option, Izuku walked down the steps and found a place to sit while reading the book he was given, as it was now his only clue. Finding an elevated slope, he was about to sit, before noticing that on it was a doll. Its albine complexion only complemented the beauty of the life-sized doll. Izuku didn't know why. It could be only his mind playing tricks on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was looking at him. Shaking his head, he pulled the book and started to read. About the hunt. About the hunters. About himself. Arg. A pained scream escaped Izuku's throat. The boy quickly pushed himself back to his feet, just on time to dodge a swipe of the deadly claws that smashed the place he was standing a second ago. He looked up, and the cleric beast looked down at him. He quickly pulled a Molotov from one of the pockets of the hunter garb he found in the sewers, something that saved his life a few times only in this battle. Izuku lit the cloth and threw the bottle with all his strength and rage. He was tired of this damn city. He was tired of these cursed beasts. He was tired of falling into the cold embrace of death only to find himself thrown back into this nightmare of a hunt. The beast roared in pain when its fur lit up in flames, and doubly so when Izuku used the opportunity to shoot its knee. The beast stumbled and fell, and Izuku wouldn't let it rise anymore. Izuku dashed at the head of the downed giant. With a roar of his own, he plunged his fist into the eye of the beast, forcing the organ aside, pushing deeper, deeper, until his whole arm was inserted on the ocular cavity of the monster. With the last of his fading strength, Izuku gripped what he could, praying that it was something important, and pulled. The beast gave a last pained whine before falling silent. Izuku, covered in blood, felt the echoes of his foe flowing into him, but he paid little mind to it. He was finally here. Now he could find the pale blood and go home, away from this hell. Izuku reached the gates at the end of the bridge that became the battlefield between hunter and beast, and pushed. It was locked. Izuku could feel his heart falling like a corpse. All the pain, all the deaths, for nothing. He was still here, trapped, stranded in an alien land where monsters lurked in every dark corner. He allowed himself a minute to scream in despair before getting up and start to walk back. His mother was still waiting for him, and he would go back to her, whatever it takes. He would go home. A lantern in the middle of the bridge got his attention. Quickly setting it alight, he was greeted by the recomforting visage of the messengers raising from the mist, one of them quickly scoping something from the ground and giving it to him. It was some type of badge. He graciously accepted, as graciously as an extremely awkward teenager could at least. Kneeling in front of the lantern, he reached it and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was back on the hunter's dream. The workshop stood in all its decrepit glory, but there was something different. The doll. It was moving. His mother would kill him if she discovered he disrespected someone, got up and walked to him. If she had done that before Izuku dived into the streets of Yamam, he would believe it was only a woman with a mutant quirk, but now he knew better. There were no quirks here, only blood and death. He tensed, waiting for an attack that, fortunately, never came. She bowed slightly to him. Her movements fluid, unlike what her appearance might have suggested. Welcome, good hunter. Izuku, true to his awkward self, fumbled before bowing too. Hello. Who are you? Izuku felt the blood echoes merging with him, the rush almost drowning the feeling of his body forcefully changing, muscles swelling, bones hardening, senses sharpening along his mind. In the end, Izuku opened his eyes and stood up. The first thing he noticed was, I got tall. The boy was now at least 1 meter and 75. His clothes now fitted him and he didn't have to look up that much to look dull in the eyes. She chuckled at his outburst and smiled. "Why don't you try your new weapon now?" Izuku nodded and once again tried to lift the slab of rock he left aside. The Quirk hammer seemed a good idea for a weapon, especially with the description note the messengers gave him. A trick weapon typically used by healing church hunters. On the one side, an easily handled silver sword. On the other, a giant obtuse stone weapon, characterized by a blunt strike and extreme force of impact. In the end, Izuku underestimated their definition of giant and overestimated his own old enhanced strength. He could decently use the sword, but he couldn't even take the hammer off the ground. Now, with a fluid movement, Izuku thrusted the sword into the opening of the hammer half-handle, and with a pull, rested it on his shoulders. Taking some distance, he gave a few practice swings. His muscles bulged with the strain, but he could still give quite a few attacks before having to stop to retake his breath. Izuku turned to the doll and smiled below his balaclava. He was awarded with her own smile. Sheathing his weapons, Izuku started to walk back to her, when he felt the world shift out of focus. It was like all his senses simply got suddenly blurred. He could barely take another step before falling. The doll's distant voice being the last thing he heard. Izuku's body hit something soft. He couldn't appreciate it though, as the weight of the hammerhead in his back was really discomforting. His eyes shot open and he sprung back to his feet, hastily drawing his weapons. He quickly looked around, and the room he found himself was so familiar at the same time it was strange to him. It was his room, full of hero merch, mainly composed of All Might memorabilia. The wave of relief that washed him was so strong that Izuku couldn't help but fall on his behind. He was home. The thought was enough to bring him to tears. He was about to run out of his room when he saw that he was still on his hunter garb. He was filled with a creeping dread as he realized it was real. That hell is real. The hunt and the blood and the death was real. Izuku was starting to hyperventilate when a knock on his door broke through the haze of his panic. "Izuku. Sweetie, it's almost time for school. Get ready while I prepare breakfast." His mother's voice was never so clear to him. With his new hearing he could pick all the love that laced her voice while talking to him. "Oh okay Mom, just give me a minute." He got a quick response before the sound of her footsteps reached him. Izuku quickly shed the clothes that even now smelled like blood. Turning to his wardrobe, he found the loosest shirt and black pants he had, and while they fit, they clinged to his body, and didn't matter what he did, he couldn't button up his gakuren. "I'll just leave it open," he sighed. Quickly pushing his hunter apparatus, reed weapons, to the back of his wardrobe, he took his combat garments and dashed out of the room, quickly dumping it on the wash machine in the faint hope of getting rid of the smell of death lingering in the fabric. In a second Izuku was in the living room, just in time to see his mother finishing to set the table. "Izuku. Good morning Izuku, what happened to you?" Izuku didn't try to answer, instead he reached his mother in a blur of movement, hugging her while breaking into sobs. She was startled by it, but her motherly instincts won in the end. Hugging him back, she tried her best to calm him down while shedding tears of her own. After some minutes and a lot of crying, the two Midoriyas calmed enough to talk. "Izuku, what happened to you? You were not like that yesterday," Inko said while examining her son. He was taller, and he was now muscular enough to fill his large shirts. She was worried for a second that he was taking something he shouldn't, but nothing could have this kind of effect that fast, so the only option left was, "Izuku, you have a quirk." Izuku's brain short-circuited for a second. He was about to correct her when he stopped. He couldn't tell her about Yamam, the things he saw, the things he did. "Why yeah, I think I do." His sobs helped to hide the sound of his voice cracking for having to lie to his mother, the only person that didn't abandon him. The reminder only made the lie more painful and necessary. "We can look at this later. I'll mark an appointment with the doctor. You think you can go to school today?" Inko asked while making sure that Izuku was really okay. The idea of having to go to school, after everything he suffered in that accursed city, was strangely reassuring. The disgust his classmates and teachers showed to him was nothing compared to the murderous rage of the insane Yarnamites and the bloodlust of the beasts. It was silly, but he couldn't find in himself the part that was scared of a bunch of teenagers anymore. That part of him probably died in the blood-soaked streets of Yarnam. Izuku devoured Inko's cooking with a bestial hunger, his mother's food tasting even better after a night where the only thing that he got to swallow was his own blood. After another goodbye and bone-crushing hug from Inko, as now Izuku has to be careful to not hurt his mother with his enhanced strength, he was out on the streets and walking to school. On the way, he found a villain wreaking havoc, but unfortunately, after everything that happened that morning, he had forgotten his notebook. It was one of his various journals where he analyzed heroes and their quirks. He really wanted to have it with him right now. Izuku felt a tug on his leg. Looking down, he saw it was only a messenger. Wait, what? He brought his eyes back down and saw the pale figure looking back at him, one hand tugging on his leg, and another holding his current hero notebook. He runned his panicked glance over the crowd around him, but saw that no one was paying him and the small creature any mind. Quickly reaching down, he took his journal and said a quick thank, making the messenger very happy. Making sure no one saw the exchange, he sighed in relief, before jotting down notes about the battle happening in front of him. Two things that changed in his stay on Yamam is that not only he now had a more experienced view of combat, but he also cut his mumbling habit, as not staying silent when making a plan was an invitation for a beast to bite your neck off, and drowning on his own blood was one of the worst ways to die, in Izuku's opinion. Izuku saw the debut of the new heroine Mount Lady, but his mind wasn't on it anymore. He was thinking about how he got used to the idea of his own demise after joining the hunt. It wasn't that much scary after 57 times, yes he kept track. But not only that, he was different after his blood ministration, and even more so after killing the cleric beast. He couldn't exactly explain, he only felt different. He stayed lost in thought all the way to his school. When he finally reached Aldera, he couldn't help but notice how unimpressive it was. Before, he always got intimidated by the building and what it meant to him, but now, after seeing the Gothic constructions of Yamam and the monsters that inhabited them, he just felt at peace knowing now that he was there instead of fighting to the death against the blood-crazed beasts. Entering the school, Izuku made his way to his classroom. He noticed some people staring at him, but after his sudden changes, he didn't expect any different. Hasting his steps, he reached his class. The moment he entered, all noise stopped. Izuku felt various eyes staring at him. Ducking his head, he quickly made his way to his seat, hoping no one would bother him. What a hell, DEKU! His hopes quickly withered and died, as he was used to. Bakugo Katsuki, his childhood friend turned bully, was the first to recompose himself and to no one's surprise, shout at Izuku. But some superior entity must have felt pity for the green-haired boy, as the teacher entered the room, quickly silencing the students. After that, Izuku allowed himself to relax. He tuned out his teacher, as he always kept himself ahead of the class to make sure he got good grades, and that way no one could try to sabotage his studies. Reaching below his desk, Izuku tried to focus on what he wanted. A second later, he felt the old leather cover of one of the books he wanted on his hands. A quick glance showed a messenger, and that his hypothesis was right. The messengers could bring Izuku things from Yamam, as this book was one of the ones in the hunter's workshop he had wanted to read. That was frightening. That place was still there. Would Izuku be dragged there again? Would he have to suffer the horrors of the hunt again? Izuku's questions were interrupted by his death-honed instincts screaming at him. In a movement that wasn't gracious in any form, but saved him from an explosion anyway, he dodged. DEKU. You think you can get on Ua? You loser? Izuku didn't pay the words thrown at him any mind, more focused on the fact he had to tilt his head down to look his bully in the eye now. Fact that said bully noticed, and that only made him more enraged. However, Izuku noticed that the rage that before would make him cower in fear was nothing compared to the bloodlust conveyed by the eyes of murderous Yamamites. Bakugo was still shouting at him, but he wasn't listening. Izuku was lost in his mind, asking himself what the traumatic stay in Yamam changed, and what had only opened his eyes to the truth. He didn't have to be scared of a school bully, because he wouldn't ever do anything as bad as even the stray dog of Yamam. The teacher's voice brought him back to earth. The blonde bomber didn't look like he had finished whatever he was telling Izuku, but complied anyway. The rest of the day passed on a blur. Izuku barely focusing on what was happening, more focused on himself and what Yamam twisted about him. Using the classes to read some of the books about the blood ministration in hunters, Izuku could confirm that whatever they had put in his veins, it altered his genetic composition enough to resemble him to the beasts he was supposed to hunt. It made sense in a way. After all, you need a monster to kill a monster. The bell rang and Izuku quickly stuffed his things back in his backpack, but he dropped the books of Yamam origin in the ground, letting the messengers take them back. He got up just in time to see Bakugo and his minions block his way. Now DEKU. You have no one to save you, so we are going to have a chat. He punctuated the last word with pops from his quirk. Izuku could feel his fight or flight instincts flaring, so he chose to follow the strategy that he used when he found himself in a difficult situation on the streets of Yamam, run. In a blur of movement, Izuku jumped over the desks between him and the exit, and then he bolted, running as if he had a whole entourage of Yamamites on his heels. He only stopped when he found himself below a dark underpass, breathless but safe, at least for now. I have to say, Kachan is not as bad as a hound of Yamam, but he still is pretty scary. He chuckled slightly. Recovering, Izuku was about to leave his temporary hideout, when his ears perceived a sound coming from below his feet. In what he would like to consider a combat roll, but being more of an awkward stumble with a quick recovery, he dodged in time to see the manhole he was standing on shooting up, and a green sludge flowing from it. Before he could realize what he was doing, he grabbed a Molotov handed to him by a messenger, set it alight, and threw it at the disgusting mass in front of him. The thing screamed. The alcohol mixing with its liquid body only kept it burning. When the villain finally recovered, he was met with a stone hammer to the face. The impact splashed its head area on the wall of the tunnel, and the pain of the hit and the burns pulled the villain to unconsciousness. Izuku waited for a couple seconds before relaxing, and then the realization of what he did hit at him like a ton of bricks. He stopped a villain. He, alone, stopped a villain that would probably hurt someone if let loose. The weight of what he did and what it meant made breathing difficult. He could be a hero. Before he could lose himself in the thought, another figure came from the manhole. Don't fear, because I am late. The voice was booming, and it matched the figure from where it came perfectly, because standing there was All Might. Izuku's brain fried, but his body remembered the priorities of the situation. Can I have your autograph? He asked while bowing and holding his journal to the hero with one hand while the other held his Kirkhammer. The man laughed and signed the notebook, but he was also analyzing the scene in front of him. A boy, that couldn't be in high school yet, was armed and he captured the villain that he was chasing. He had questions, but first, now give me a second to secure this evildoer. All Might moved in blur, and in a blink he had a soda bottle full of sludge. Whoa. Izuku had stars in his eyes. He just saw All Might capture a villain in person. The hero laughed at the boy's enthusiasm. Now my boy, I thank you for the help, but you shouldn't be stopping villains yet. That remembered Izuku that what he did was considered vigilantism. With a yelp, he dropped his hammer, what fell to the ground like the rock it was. To both of their surprise, the messengers took the Kirkhammer and dragged it back into the mist. All Might laughed, even if what he saw gave him a slightly headache. That's an interesting quirk, my boy. Making weapons from mist is useful, but remember to be careful with it. Izuku's heart almost stopped when he saw the messengers, but with what All Might said, he couldn't see them. Another question to the pile, but now to more important things. All Might, I have to ask you something. The hero raised an eyebrow but gave him the go-ahead. Can I be a hero like you? He couldn't stop the words that started to come out, even after everything he did. All the blood in his hands. He want D to be a hero. No one ever believed me. No one said I could do it, but I want to be like you. I want to save people, to make them feel safe, to protect them from the horrible things that hide in the dark. All Might was surprised by the boy pouring his heart out like that, but the passion in his voice assured him of one thing. Yes, my boy, I believe that with a conviction like that, you can make a fine hero, and you already beat this old man today. He laughed, the sound echoing in the tunnel, and Izuku couldn't stop himself from laughing along with him, even if he was sobbing. He was crying, but from the first time in a long time, he was happy. Someone believed in him. The hero gave him a minute to recompose himself before accompanying the boy out of the tunnel, when a wet cough escaped his lips. Izuku was about to ask if he was okay, when the smell reached him. Blood. All Might gave a hastily goodbye and crouched to jump, and Izuku, in a mix of concern and recklessness, grabbed the hero's leg. Toshinori was cursing himself. He barely had time left, but before he could berate himself for losing so much time lost in the sewers, he felt a weight in his leg. Looking down, he saw that the boy that defeated the villain that he couldn't had rigged a ride. Young man, I like my fans' support, but that's a little too much. Sorry, but you're hurt, he shouted above the wind roar in their ears. Toshinori's non-existent stomach dropped. The boy knew. How? He was sure that the teenager didn't see the blood on his hand. Before he could ask, they landed on top of a building. Toshinori was about to try and make an excuse, when his body started to steam. No, not yet, damn it. Izuku stared as the greatest hero in the world, deflated. A husk of a man was what was in his place, And Izuku would have liked to deny it, but the smell was the same, All Might? Toshinori sighed. The cat was out of the bag now. Yes, it's me kid, sit down, we need to talk. Interesting. The boy is trapped here like the rest of us, however at the same time, he is capable of escaping between its fingers. The old hunter gave a laugh. That small victory against that accursed being was enough to lift his spirits. So he is free? The doll asked, and someone could mistake her tone for one with hope. No, it will drag him here again. The question is, can he repeat the feat? Izuku was walking aimlessly on the street, after his talk with All Might. Seeing the scar that almost cost the hero's life, he got his view of life change, again. After his numerous encounters with his end, only to rise again, Izuku became a little desensitized to death. But after seeing that even the strongest in the world could have fallen, and the knowledge that he wouldn't be back made his appreciation for life come back even stronger. He didn't even know if he could escape death anymore, as far as he knew he was back to have one life, and only one. Did he want to be a hero? The answer was a wholeheartedly yes, but he had to be more careful about it now. He couldn't save anyone if he was dead. Izuku was brought out of his head by the sound of an explosion. He was in the middle of a crowd. Did I subconsciously walk here? Wow, I know I'm a fanboy, but to go hunting hero fights like this is a whole new level. His sweat dropped, but using the opportunity presented to him, he made his way to the front of the crowd to analyze the situation. But he didn't expect the scene before his eyes. In a second, he moved, his body following the base instinct to save people that even the blood forced into him could not erase. Toshinori was drowning in his guilt. First he couldn't reach the villain, now he let it escape. What type of hero he was. But now, that wasn't a boy there to do his job. Like if the universe had heard his thoughts and laughed at him, the boy, the same boy that minutes ago had found his secret, appeared from the middle of the crowd and dashed at the sows happening on the street. While he and the other heroes watched, as the green-haired teen ran headfirst into the fire. In an impressive display, the boy, Midoriya, dodged the hazards in his way and reached the pile of sludge and the middle schooler he took as hostage. Reaching down, the boy grabbed a loose stone from the ground and threw it in the villain's eye, making him recoil from pain and letting the hostage breathe. Midoriya buried his hands on the sludge, and in a feat of strength, pulled the other boy out. They were saying something to each other, but Toshinori was too far to hear. Midoriya then threw the blonde boy to one of the heroes. Death arms if he wasn't mistaken. The boy was about to make his quick retreat when the villain recovered. That was enough. Even if he had to go past his limit, he wouldn't let a child suffer for his mistakes any longer. Izuku was finally going home. After being saved by All Might, he got scolded by the heroes for his reckless charge and sent on his way with what wasn't more than a slap on the wrist. He imagined what they would have said if he was still powerless, but that was a question that probably wouldn't have an answer. He just hoped his mother didn't watch the news today, for both of their sakes. As he chuckled at the amusing thought of his mother flooding their apartment with tears, the sound of heavy footsteps reached his ears, but he had enough for the day. Quickly diving in a side alley, he saw Bakugo passing his hiding spot. Dodged a bullet here. He sighed, but a hand on his shoulder almost made him jump out of his skin. Turning around with his hammer in hand, he saw that the one behind him was none other than All Might. "Yeah kid, sorry for the scare," he said with his hands up in surrender. "How did you sneak up on me?" Izuku's senses were much sharper now, so it was a valid question. "Hey, I know how to be sneaky when I want to." The thought of the wall of muscle that is All Might being sneaky was something that was both hilarious and inconceivable. "Okay. So you need something? Because if you are still worried about your secret, I promise that I won't tell anyone." He quickly bowed while dropping his Quirk hammer and letting the messengers take it. "Hey kid, calm down, it's not for that I'm here. I was looking for you because I have an offer for you." His tone became serious, but he was sure, he found the one. Both the boy's words and actions that day made it clear. Izuku reached the door of his room in a daze, the taste of All Might's hair on his mouth still making his stomach churn in protest. Not only did he discover another secret of the hero, but he was accepted as his successor, and he passed his quirk to him. Izuku still didn't believe it, but after everything that happened to him lately, it wasn't actually that weird. His mother had unfortunately seen the news, and while she didn't flood the apartment, she still cried more than what was probably healthy. She knew Izuku wanted to be a hero, but Inko was his mother and she would always worry about him. After apologies, reassurances, and even more tears, Izuku was ready to end the day. Crashing on his bed unceremoniously, he let himself be dragged to unconsciousness. What he didn't know is that he wouldn't stop in a peaceful slumber. No, he would be once again dragged back to the hell he barely escaped, because after all, a hunter must hunt. Izuku's eyes slowly opened, and as his vision cleared, his dread only grew. He was back. No. He hastily pulled himself up from the ground. The workshop towering over him was a cruel reminder of what awaited him. Welcome back, good hunter. The doll's voice attracted Izuku's dead eyes to her. Her tone was almost sympathetic, but it didn't change that she had a duty to fulfill just like the hunter she approached. I hope you found solace in the waking world, but now is time to go back to the hunt. Izuku wanted to deny, to scream, to lash out, but he couldn't find in himself the energy to do so. With a nod, he walked into the workshop and found his hunter gear waiting for him. With mechanical movements, he armed himself. Stop it, boy, an old and gruff voice came from behind him. Turning around, he saw German. He didn't like the old hunter much, after his comments about him and, especially, the doll. Now he knew what he had meant, but even then the way he dismissed Izuku always annoyed him greatly. You look like dead meat. If you don't pull yourself together, the beasts are going to tear you apart. He gave a throaty laugh, but then, in an uncharacteristic display, he turned serious. You already escaped once, what is stopping you from doing it again? That made light come back to Izuku's eyes. German was right, he could escape once more, and this time he had an ace up his sleeve. One for all, the ancient Quirk from All Might himself, and it was now his. The hero had seen something in Izuku. He had believed that he had what it takes to be a hero, and to take his place. He could do it. He feared what he would have to face again, but he would find a way to go back home. Ugh! This place stinks. Izuku gagged while climbing a stair out of the sewers. Unlike the first time, where he died to the corpses in the water that weren't dead yet, Izuku got a chance to explore, and the stair leading up and away from the dreadful smell of rot was his first chosen option. Getting to the top, he saw that he was back to the plaza he passed on his way to the bridge where he faced the cleric beast. He had tried to open the gate in front of him before, but the lever that was now at his reach pointed that it was locked by a mechanism. Pulling the lever, the gate opened slowly. Izuku gave a relieved sigh. At least now there was a shortcut that was relatively safer to reach the sewers. He turned back and was about to go back to the stair, when a small voice made him jump startled. Hello, mister, are you a hunter? A little girl's voice came from the window at his side. Izuku tentatively came closer. Why yes. He could see the tiny figure behind the curtains, and the sound of someone sane talking to him made him feel better than he would like to admit. My daddy's a hunter too. He is out there now, but he's taking too long. My mommy is looking for him, but she forgot the music box. She uses it to bring daddy home when he forgets. Mister, can I ask you something? The girl opened the curtains, revealing her ivory complexion, pale blonde hair, and red eyes that shone like rubies in the light of the candles illuminating the house. Izuku was glad she was in her house instead of in the middle of the madness that befell the city, and he had half a mind to close the gate back to make sure the girl remained safe. From what she told him, she was alone in her house, which wasn't a good sign, but if she would ask him what he thought she would, then he could solve that problem. Of course. He said gently, can you bring mommy and daddy back home, please? I can. Can you tell me how they look? Izuku knew that it was dangerous to go out of his way like that, but he wanted to be a hero, and a hero helped everyone in need, so that's what he's going to do. Thank you, mister. The girl gave him a description of the two, and her name, Nicola. Izuku found the names in Yamam strange, but it could be a matter of perspective, as Nicola also found his name weird. And here, it's the music box that mommy uses. Nicola opened the window and passed to him an old worn box. Izuku opened the lid and a lullaby started to play. It was soothing, a small reprieve from the sounds of suffering and death that echoed on the night. Okay. Now stay inside, Nicola-chan, and be careful, okay? The girl nodded. When she was once again safely inside her house, Izuku departed. He had another task now, and he planned to accomplish both. I hate this place, Izuku complained mentally. First it was dogs. The blood-crazed hounds entered a frenetic storm of barks when they saw him. Then the mean lady had been rude with him only because he was a foreigner, and now he was lost. He knew it could be a lot worse, but he already died 2 times, one for the rats that took him by surprise, and another from a bad fall where he ended up breaking his neck, so he wasn't in a good mood. A noise from his left, he quickly turned, hammer in hand, only to be met with a barrel between his eyes. Now, what do we have here? The voice of the woman was teasing, but he could feel his hairs standing on end. She tilted his hat up with the point of the gun, Izuku completely still by fear of getting a handful of quicksilver right on the head. The crow mask approached his face. What is a child doing here? Trying to hunt in this forsaken place? Go home, boy. Izuku didn't know what made him snap at someone holding a gun to his face, maybe her dismissive tone, maybe the certainty he wouldn't be dead forever, or he was just done with all this madness, but he did. I would really like that, but unfortunately I'm trapped in this hellhole. The woman simply stared as Izuku panted after his outburst. The boy was just waiting for her to shoot and be done with it. He would have to come back all the way there once again, so it would be better if she finished it quickly. But instead of pulling the trigger, the crow-masked woman only sheathed her weapons. You have guts, boy, I'll give you that. Now, find a place to sit and get comfortable, we are going to have a talk. The change of tone was so sudden, it was enough to give him whiplash. The woman sat on one of the crates laying around. Well, boy, I'm waiting. Izuku stayed in place, still on guard. What are you trying here? He asked. She chuckled. Good, so you are not a gullible foreigner, that's already a good start. What I'm doing? Well, you can say that I'm just an elder imparting her knowledge. She then laughed, and believe me, boy, you will need it if you want to make it to the end of the night in mostly one piece. What is wrong with this place? Izuku shouted while running. After Eileen Sensei, a title that after he explained its meaning made the woman dislike it instantly, saying she wasn't his teacher and it was only giving him some common knowledge of Yamam, explained in detail about the hunt and everything it implies, both to him and the city. Things were going relatively well. He, after learning that the messengers could bring his things from the waking world to Yamam, made a new series of journals, The Hunter's Guide, where he put every scrap of information that could be useful. It was already in its third volume thanks to Eileen, and now this hell of a city was beginning to make sense, if only just a little. But now, after fighting a mob on a narrow bridge, Izuku found himself running from a giant ball on fire that was literally hot in his heels. Throwing himself to the side, he felt the heat of the flames while the death orb passed him. Getting back to his feet, Izuku made his way back to the bridge and then the other side of it. After killing the brute that almost flattened him with the burning trap, he kept going. He shouldn't be far from Odon Chapel now, and Eileen said it was a safe place, so there was probably a lantern there. So after this graveyard there should be a way to get to the chapel. Izuku made a quick check on the instructions he received. He was close, maybe he could go back home if he got far enough. It was one of the few theories he had, so it was worth considering. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of metal tearing into flesh. Izuku cautiously approached, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing on a pile of bodies was a man. He was tall, using an hunter axe to repeatedly strike a corpse. He was wearing old clothes and a hat that covered most of his disheveled hair. Beasts all over the shop, he started in a grave voice, but it sounded wrong, like if he wasn't really there. You'll be one of them, sooner or later. When he turned, and Izuku saw his face, with the eyes covered by bandages, his heart almost stopped. The voice of the little girl he promised to help sounding on his mind. Daddy is really tall and strong, but he always have his eyes covered. I wonder how he knows where things are if he can't see them. Gulping, Izuku asked, Gascoin? Sir, is that you? Your daughter is waiting for you? Izuku was interrupted by the sound of a gun being loaded. Quickly jumping aside, Izuku could barely get out of the way of the shot. Wait, I'm not here to fight you. His plea fell in deaf ears, as Gascoin lunged at him with his axe. The bloody weapon grazed Izuku's flank. The boy fell to the ground with the force of the hit throwing him off balance. Another thing that hit the cold floor of the cemetery was the music box. It rolled along the ground and ended with its lid open. The sound of the lullaby filled the night, and the mind of the old hunter. Izuku saw the man scream. Using the opportunity presented to him, he healed himself with a quick injection of blood, feeling his wound stitch itself back together. He got back up and picked the box. Please. I don't want to fight you. Just stop and let me explain. Izuku barely finished when he had to once again dodge another furious swing of Gascoin's weapon. The man was now rampaging with reckless ferocity, and Izuku couldn't keep up with the whirlwind of steel that was his enemy. Another cut, another wound, another step closer to death. Izuku had to do something to make the man stop, and the answer for his problem was the small wooden box he once again opened. The lullaby was one more time accompanied with the pained scream of Gascoin. "Please. Your wife is out here looking for you. And your daughter is waiting alone at home for her parents," Izuku shouted while using 2 blood vials in quick succession. Gascoin was now roaring, his technique and skill transformed into fury. Izuku barely could get out of the way of a shot, only to be met with an axe head on his side. The blow made him fly through the air and land painfully on his back in the stairs that led to the gates of the graveyard. The boy swallowed the blood that was beginning to accumulate in his mouth and got up while using another blood vial. Izuku saw Gascoin already halfway up the steps. He quickly pulled the box once more and opened the lid, and then he watched a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Gascoin stopped, dropping his weapons and grabbing his head with both hands. The man screamed. And the beast roared. Izuku could only stare as the beast that crawled within came out, tearing the man it inhabited apart. The monster leapt in the air, and Izuku almost didn't register that he threw himself forward, letting the monster sail harmlessly above him. The beast hit the ground, and the impact that left a crater was what brought Izuku back to his senses. He looked back, and in the bloodshot eyes of the beast he saw that he failed. He didn't save the father of the little girl that was still waiting, not knowing he would never come back. Izuku felt rage boiling inside him. He dashed at the creature, his own roaring shout drowning the one of his enemy. He couldn't save Gascoin, but he would avenge him. Hunter and beast lunged at each other. Izuku pulled his fist back, his weapon forgotten in his fury, and he felt something burning on his veins. The hunter buckled, letting the beast claw pass over him, and with an uppercut, Izuku let the power that now dwelled within him explode. The fist connected, and the decrepit city of Yamam felt the power of one for all. The beast head was obliterated by the force, becoming nothing more than a fine red mist that was swept aside by the violent winds that followed. Izuku let his arm fall, seeing the headless corpse tilting back and ultimately crashing on the ground. He took deep breaths, letting the rest of the adrenaline on his system wear off, but that's when the pain hit him. With a strangled cry, Izuku looked down to see his arm was now a purple and limp mess. His sleeve and glove were destroyed by his punch. With tears in his eyes, Izuku started to use his last blood vials. After burning through the last 5, his arm healed back to its normal state. So that's the power of one for all. It makes sense now why All Might said I should be careful when using it. This type of backslash could be dangerous in a battle. He would be down an arm until he healed, and even then he would spend too much time healing himself. Izuku tried to focus on those thoughts instead of the growing dread he felt. Gascoin was dead, and Nicola. No, she still had her mother. Izuku would find her, and a shadow in the edge of his vision got his attention. Quickly picking back his weapons, he turned to the direction he saw it, the ledge of the elevated area he was. The young hunter approached the broken rail with careful steps. He had come too far to die now. He reached the edge of the fall and looked down. And his heart fell in a pit of despair. On the roof of the small shack below him was the corpse of a woman. The cold body bore a simple dress and a shiny red brooch. Izuku approached the window, dead eyes staring vacantly through the glass. The room inside was well lit, but the warmth was lost on him. After all, this was where the girl he failed resided. He couldn't say she still lived, not after how badly he damaged her life. Izuku flinched when the window opened. Nicola emerged halfway through, sticking her head and torso into the cold night air. With those bright red eyes full of hope, she shouted, "Mister, you're back. Did you find my mommy and daddy?" Every word was a knife plunged into Izuku's heart. He couldn't even speak, but could only raise his hand shakily. Nicola frowned for a second, but then her eyes fell on the red brooch on the hunter's hand. Even at her age, the girl still understood what the bloodstained jewelry meant. The girl wept, sobbed, her body shaking with mourning racks as morbid as any act of rigor mortis. Izuku spilled tears of his own, though they felt insulting, like he had no right to cry when the pain here belonged to her. No, mommy, daddy, come back, don't leave me alone." The girl's body lost its strength, falling from the window. Izuku quickly reached the girl, pulling her into a tight hug before she could hit the ground. On that isolated street of Yamam, in the dark night of the hunt, a young hunter and an innocent child cried together for those that were taken away by the cold hands of death, lost forever to the ones left behind to suffer. Izuku hugged Nicola close to him while the girl's body shook from the pained sobs that escaped her lips. He failed, he couldn't save her parents, he couldn't stop it, he was too late to do anything for Viola, and Gascoin was lost right before his eyes, the last of the man losing the battle against the beast while all Izuku could do was watch. Now Nicola was alone, and the hunt had only begun. She wasn't safe there, she wouldn't be anywhere in this accursed city. He would not leave her here, to die to one of the beasts that roamed the streets, even the ones wearing the bodies of man. Izuku held Nicola tightly, he knew where she could be safe, far from this nightmare. If this forsaken place took everything from her, then Izuku would take her from it. If he couldn't protect her home, then he would give her a better one. If there was no one else to take care of her, then he will. Izuku's emotions boiled until they reached the breaking point, and with it he broke free from the shackles that chained him to Yamam. Nicola was still crying on his chest, but they were now on Izuku's soft bed back at his home. He didn't know why, but after being hit by another dose of vertigo, Izuku felt himself falling for a second before his vision cleared and he found himself back in his bedroom, the crying child still in his arms. He did it, he at least brought Nicola back with him. He failed her so much, but at least he could give her this. With new tears streaking down his face, Izuku just sat there, letting his sorrow spilling out. But at that moment the door opened. "Izuku, you're okay?" Inko asked, coming into the room. She was met with the sight of her son wearing strange clothes while crying with a little girl on his lap, equally pouring her heart out. "Hey mom," Izuku, voice cracking, said to his mother, "I can explain, but can you give us some space first?" Inko really didn't want to, but she saw her son's pleading eyes and couldn't say no. "Oh okay, come out when you're ready, I'll prepare breakfast for our guest in the meantime," she said softly before closing the door. Inko was pacing beside the table, her worry shooting through the roof. She knew something happened with her son, he was changed, and not only physically, she saw the bright spark in his eyes had diminished. She thought that he would be excited with his quirk, and she saw how fast he could move now, so she was sure it was a quirk, but he looked even more depressed than when he was diagnosed quirkless. And now he was in his room, dressed in weird clothes and armed. Inko saw the gun on his hip. She really wanted to barge in the room, take those dangerous things away and demand an explanation, but he was also with a child, and her motherly side wouldn't permit her to scare the poor girl even more. So all she could do now was wait and pray her baby boy would be fine. The door of Izuku's room opened, and he, still in his hunter garb, minus his weapons and hat, walked on the living room while still carrying Nicola. The girl had stopped crying, but she refused to let go of him, a fact that made Izuku's heart burn with guilt and shame. He didn't deserve her trust after what he did. Izuku took a seat, and whispered something to the girl that Inko couldn't understand. It sounded like English. The girl nodded and Izuku took one of the French toasts they would have for breakfast and offered her. Nicola turned to the side and took a small bite of the bread. It tasted good. She thought that it was like something her mother would make for her, what made her eyes begin to water again as she quietly ate. Izuku felt his heart break piece by piece. He robbed the girl's father from her and now here he was, feeding her while trying to offer her solace. He knew it was all he could do now, but that didn't change how horrible he felt. "Mom, I have some things to tell you," Izuku started, glancing at his mother that was seated on the other side of the table watching the scene in front of her unfold. "It's a long story, and a really bad one at that." His voice cracked, but he pressed forward. "Since yesterday, I think that it was yesterday at least, something happened to me. I don't know how, but I have been in a place called Yamam." Inko felt a chill at the name Izuku gave her, and by the haunted look on his face, she was sure it would only get worse. Izuku was walking on the street, hands full of bags with essential things for his new charge. After giving his mother a heavily washed-down version of what he faced on the hunt until now, cutting the more graphic details, such as his deaths, Izuku had explained her Nicola's situation. While he couldn't bring himself to explain why he was the reason she didn't have anyone to take care of her, Inko still got the message that something had happened and now Izuku was everything she had. Inko was quick to support Izuku, and now the woman was at home with the girl, who had quickly fallen asleep after exhausting herself with her crying. Izuku discovered that he somehow was switching languages when speaking with Nicola, something pointed by his mother. He would look into it later, but what was important was that Inko couldn't completely understand what Nicola said. She could grab the general meaning with what she knew of English, even if he wasn't sure if that was really the dialect of Yamam. With the girl safe in his home and with his mother watching over her, Izuku had gone out to collect a variety of items his mother asked. From new clothes for Nicola, to hygiene products, and while Izuku wasn't sure what he was doing, as his outfits were always bare and plain, he still tried his best. He, after some hours, was finally going back home. The sun was already starting to go down, the buildings of the city casting shadows along the streets. And while passing by an alley to dodge the more busy streets and crowds, it hit him, first the smell, then the tiny figure that ran into his leg. Izuku looked down and his green eyes met red ones that had such a familiar feeling in them, fear. Izuku crouched down. The one that ran into him was a girl that should be Nicola's age. She had silvery white hair and a pale yellow horn on her forehead. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, even if he already knew the answer. Children shouldn't be dressed in rags and bandages, and they also shouldn't smell like fresh blood, but what really hammered it home was the terror on the shaking small frame that Izuku was currently holding. As if the universe hadn't found the evidence that the child in front of him needed help enough, another figure appeared. This one was a man. He was shirtless, his face covered by a bird mask, and while he was laughing, Izuku could feel the smell of carnage oozing from him. Izuku was proud of his intelligence. It was one of the things that helped him escape Yamam, or at least progress through it, so he already could put the pieces together to know the basic situation. This guy was a villain. He was after this girl, and he would have to go through Izuku's cold dead corpse before laying a finger on her. Eri was scared. The bird people were after her, and now she ran into someone that would die because of her. The stranger was the only person that didn't scare her. His hands were warm, but now he would die. The thought alone made tears form in her eyes. "Haha kid, you sure can run, but looks like this is the end of the line for you," the birdman said, laughing all the while. "No," the stranger said, and the birdman stopped laughing. "What was that, brat? Want to play the hero? Fine by me. Just don't die too fast." The birdman rushed at them. Eri didn't know what happened. One second she was with the stranger, the other she was sitting on the ground with some bags next to her, and the stranger standing in front of her with a hammer bigger than her in his hands. The birdman threw a punch to the stranger's head, but he just moved his neck and let it pass where his head was. Then he swung his hammer. The first swing made the birdman crunch below it. The second he stepped back. On the third the stranger swung over his head. When the hammer hit the ground, felt the whole alley shake. The birdman stumbled. The stranger used this moment to rush at him. He made something on his hammer and Eri heard a click. When he swung again, a blade came from the hammer letting sparks fly. The attack slashed the man's chest, and Eri saw blood starting to drip, but the stranger still had one hand on the hammer half. He moved forward, dragging the rock square on the ground, causing a noise that made Eri shiver. The stranger threw his arm up, and the hammerhead sent the birdman flying. He ended hitting the ground on the other end of the alley. Eri didn't believe what she was seeing. The stranger won. He wasn't dead, and she wouldn't have to come back. Just when some hope started to form on the girl's heart, the birdman started to laugh. Slowly he got back up. "Finally, someone who can really give me a fight." His laugh had a wet sound on it, but he still seemed happy. "Come on, give me more. It isn't over until one of us is dead." The birdman laughed even more. "No, I am not going to kill you," the stranger said. That made the birdman pause. "What? Why not? Wait, I get it. You're still not a hero yet, right? You need a stupid piece of plastic to say you can fight." The man's voice was annoyed, but he just scratched his head and started to turn away. "Hey, fine, I'll wait until you can go all the way. When you can go look for the Yakuza, I'll be waiting for you then." The stranger stayed quiet for a second. "Okay, but how can I be sure you won't come after me later?" the birdman said without looking back, "and ruin my fun?" "No way, I'll keep quiet about it. You are my fight, and I'm not letting the others steal it from me. Oh, just a last thing, what's your name?" The birdman stopped and turned back to the stranger. He once again kept silent for a second before answering, "Hunter." The stranger, Hunter, then turned back and started to approach Eri. The girl saw that the birdman had disappeared back in the shadows of the alley. She was alone with Hunter. He dropped his weapons, and Eri saw them being covered in mist, with what looked like white hands covering them, before they disappeared. The hunter kneeled before the girl. Once again red met green. He smiled. Inko was starting to worry. Her son still wasn't home and the sun was already down. The only thing that impeded Inko from going out looking for him was the girl still sleeping in Izuku's bedroom. She had half a mind to call the police and sent them looking for him. When she was about to do just that, she heard the sound of the door opening. Inko rushed there. "Izuku. Why took you so long?" She barely saw her son and she already had her answer. Tucked on his arm, red eye peeking from under white locks, was the reason Izuku was looking at his mother with a wry smile. I can explain. Inko was pacing in the kitchen while waiting for her son to come back. She was still trying to come to terms with everything that he told her, of how he went to some decrepit city in his sleep and had to fight feral animals to escape. Even while knowing Izuku hadn't told her all there was to know, she couldn't exactly blame him though. Just the thought of her son using the weapons Inko saw to put down an animal was enough to almost make her faint. And then there's Nicola. The girl was now an orphan. By the haunted eyes of her son, Inko knew whatever circumstances led to it had traumatized the two children and made them cling to each other for comfort. That was just one more thing to the growing list of problems they would have to face. The main one was how Izuku could keep away and never go back to Yamam. Just the name of the city was enough to strike fear at the woman's soul. Her train of thought was then interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Inko just didn't know what to do with the scene that greeted her, but her son's words were a confirmation that her growing headache would only get worse. I can explain. After another series of explanations, while trying to make his little charge comfortable, Izuku was certain he was in way over his head. After having time to calm down from his confrontation with a Yakuza member, Izuku had time to reflect on the consequences that his actions would have. He had to take care of the children while he wasn't even in high school yet. Even while thinking in all the ways he could screw up, Izuku couldn't bring himself to regret it. He did the best he could in a bad situation, and now all he can do is choose the best option from a list of horrible ones. Nicola didn't even speak the native language, and from what Eri told him, she didn't have anyone else. That meant that the only one left to shelter them. So logically, even if a part of him said he was only doing this because of his own guilt, the better option was for him to foster both girls. That's at least what Izuku told his mother, who reluctantly agreed with him, and after a long evening of trying to situate both Eri and Nicola to their new living conditions while both clung to Izuku as if their lives depended on it while trying to hide from each other, both now seemed calmer in regard to Inko, the house, and each other. What was a great improvement compared to when Nicola saw Eri holding Izuku's leg and instantly glued herself to the other one while begging for Izuku to don't abandon her. Even if Inko and Eri didn't understand what she said, Izuku's panicked reply gave a general idea that it wasn't something good. Nicola still didn't know half of what the things in the house did or their use, but was too afraid to ask, while Eri tried her best to make herself small so as to not draw attention. Both signs of problems Izuku would have to solve lest they evolve into something worse, but he didn't know even where to begin. All these things piling would have made Izuku lose his mind, but fortunately, his mom helped Izuku with everything she had, from simple things like dressing the girls in new and clean clothes to soothing all of their fears of the mess they found themselves in. In the end, they were putting Nicola and Eri to sleep in Izuku's bed, something that needed a lot of convincing on his part. Eri is okay. Nicola doesn't have a problem with sharing with you, right? He asked the girl in question, who responded in the language of Yamam but accompanied by a reluctant nod that made the message clear. But what if I hurt her? Eri's tone was neutral but with an underlined fear that seemed engraved in her bones. That was a tone Nicola knew well. It was the same her father used when he was scared of being close to her because of the things that happened in the hunt. So even while not knowing exactly what the girl that was so alike to her was saying, she brought her to a hug. It's fine. Everything is fine. You're home now. While saying the words she spoke to her father hurt now, she found solace in knowing it would help someone. And help it did. Even if Eri didn't understand what the words meant, it eased her to the presence of the girl that had her arms involving her. They both ended falling asleep while holding in each other, having found comfort in someone that understood the pain they're feeling. Izuku was relieved seeing Eri and Nicola relaxing after everything that had happened, but unfortunately, he wouldn't be joining them. In his trips to Yarnum, the starting factor seemed to be the moment he succumbed to slumber, so picking his notebooks, the books from Yarnum, and a cup of strong coffee, Izuku resigned himself for a very long night. The night was productive if nothing else. While the texts from the Hunter workshop gave him a more in-depth knowledge of the hunt, at least on a technical level. With strategic and analytical observations of how to dispatch beasts, they held little in how to solve his sleep problem, the one that involved abduction, not the selective sleep deprivation he was submitting himself to. It was almost dawn when a call in his phone woke the other two occupants of his room while capturing his eyes that were darkened with the bags below them. It was a call from All Might, so at least he knew who to blame for the two pairs of blurry red eyes that were now fixed in him. The man wanted to meet him in Dagoba Beach to start his training, training that was extremely necessary if his last try on using one for all was any indication. He just didn't know what to do about the two small figures that were now holding onto him with a vice-like grip. While making a note for touch starvation and separation anxiety on the ever-growing list of possible mental conditions he had for the three of them in his notebook, Izuku was planning on how to explain to Eri and Nicola that he would have to go for a few hours. In the end, he didn't need to, as both refused to leave his side, which was another point to validate their separation anxiety. This is how Izuku was now speeding down the street with his newfound velocity while carrying both girls in his arms, praying that All Might wouldn't ask questions and permit the girls to watch. The man in question appeared after Izuku reached the shoreline and saw the mountains of trash the beach was now known for. The physical appearance of the man was enough to scare Eri and Nicola to hide behind Izuku, who was now looking at the confused hero with an awkward smile. I can explain. Young Midoriya, is good to see you on time, but your little friends shouldn't be in bed right now. Toshinori tried to lighten the mood seeing the children scared. He knew his gaunt complexion could cause that reaction from time to time. They should, but your call ended up waking them. Toshinori had the decency to look sheepish at Izuku's mild glare, and they understandably didn't want to be left alone after everything that happened yesterday. Toshinori brawn raised to his hairline. That was concerning. Are you okay? What happened? Izuku looked to his feet. Should he tell him? It was fair after all the secrets the man had told him, and he had trusted Izuku with his legacy. It was his right to know, even if to just take the quirk back and look for someone more deserving. It's a long story. We have time. Your training would be cleaning this beach. Why don't you start the job along with the story? I can keep an eye on your friends while you do it, Toshinori said while sitting on the ground, trying to make himself look smaller and non-threatening. Okay. Just wait until the end before doing anything, okay? His successor question already told Toshinori he would not like the story, but he nodded. The boy didn't look good, so maybe letting it out would help. To say Toshinori didn't like the story was a massive understatement. His successor had more problems piled on his shoulders than most pro-heroes, and if what he said about his quirk activating when he slept to transport him to this alternative dimension, then the bags under the boy's eyes weren't from waking up earlier but from staying up all night. It was a little mind-boggling, but he saw weirder quirks in his time as a hero. And what the boy had to do to protect himself, Toshinori's heart ached as how someone so young had to pass for that type of experience. Collecting his thoughts, he started to talk and hopefully cheer Izuku up a little. You passed through a lot, my boy, but you didn't give up and did the best you could with what you had. Izuku paused his trash hauling to stare at the smiling face of his hero. That wasn't the reaction he was expecting. Aren't you angry at me? For all I did, for using it to end someone's life? The emphasis he put on the word made clear what he was talking about. Toshinori sighed. No, young Midoriya, from what you told me you took a man out of his misery and made sure he wouldn't suffer by hurting another person. He glanced at Nicola, who was sitting next to Eri at a short distance from him, both watching Izuku carry the trash up to his truck repeatedly in silence, indicating who exactly he was talking about. I know it hurt, but I also know Gascoin would thank you for protecting the most precious thing in his life. I may not speak from experience, but every father I met that was true to the duty the word carried would say the same. His words had an instant effect. Toshinori let the boy cry and sob his sorrows while remaining silent. Young Midoriya needed to put these feelings out before he drowned in them. After some minutes of the beach being full of the sounds of crying and sobbing, Izuku stopped the tears and raised his head, feeling lighter. He gave his three spectators a smile before throwing himself back on his training with renewed vigor. Toshinori too was smiling. The boy didn't let the weight of his past challenges hinder his way, that's for sure. Now that this issue was, at least partially, dealt with, it was better to move the topic along as to not pressure him with reliving the traumatic event anymore for now. About the specifics of your quirk, I'll be honest in saying I don't have the slightest clue of what to do. His words made the boy slow down a little, but as he continued the energy quickly returned. Luckily, I know someone that will. He's an old friend of mine that will have the answers, or how to get them at least. I'll make some phone calls after we end today's training session. Thank you, All Might. Izuku smiled brightly, and truly for the first time in a long while, hope renewed for a way out of the nightmare that cursed him. Now let's try something a little more difficult. How about you trying doing a smash again? Let's see what you can do with your power. Toshinori knew the first experience with One for All for the boy wasn't a pleasant one, but he had to cut any fear he may have of using it now before it turns into a problem, especially with how it can help him survive this dreadful place he found himself trapped in. As Toshinori expected, Izuku froze for a second before asking uncertainty, "You sure?" "Yes. Try to throw one good punch to the ocean. If anything happens, I'm here to help." His words didn't carry the weight they did in his hero form, but the way the boy relaxed meant they were still effective. Toshinori calmly put himself in front of the two girls to be sure they would be safe. The poor kids already suffered enough. One lost her parents and the other was being chased by the Yakuza for reasons he couldn't fathom but planned on finding out. "Okay." Izuku took a shaky breath. "Okay, I can do it." Contrary to his words, the doubts creeping on his mind sprung to life, locking him into place. Toshinori noticed, and with an understanding sigh spoke the words the boy needed to hear. "Now more than ever, young Midoriya, you are worthy of this power and of being a hero. You already proved it to me. You already proved it to them." He glanced over his shoulder to the two girls that were watching with rapt attention. "If you feel that you still have to prove it to yourself, then raise your head and do it." Izuku didn't turn, but he was sure All Might knew that he was spilling tears. His hero believed in him even after what he did. He did not deserve his faith, but he would become someone that did. He felt power flowing to his arm, a ghost sensation on his shoulder, almost as if someone was slightly squeezing it. Izuku raised his head, took a step toward and launched his fist while yelling with determination to atone for his mistakes and become a hero worthy of the mantle trusted to him, and neither Yamam nor no one would stop him. A tunnel of air pressure so strong was created by his punch, obliterating a path straight through the trash and then the ocean. When the wind died down, a clear view of the crashing waves and rising sun greeted Izuku, and he felt that maybe there would be a light at the end of the dark tunnel he found himself trapped in. Unfortunately, Izuku's happy thoughts were interrupted by the literally painful reality. Looking at his arm, which was now completely purple and mangled, Izuku let out a pained grunt before falling to his knees. Young Midoriya. He could hear over the painful rays of his mind. Izuku could swear that a hit of the cleric beast hadn't hurt as much. Tiny hands held his good arm. A golden glow flashed and the pain disappeared, giving Izuku back the clear state of mind to question what just happened. After blinking the leftover tears from his eyes, Izuku saw Eri's face, her terrified, panic-filled face. Pain instantly forgotten, Izuku was about to ask her what was wrong when the girl turned her back to him and started to run. Surprise hit him but didn't stop his legs from moving. "Eri, wait." He covered the short distance she created in a blink, All Might's startled voice sounding behind him. Thankfully, Izuku's enhanced physical capacity also included his reflexes and precision, so the boy almost graciously stopped in front of the girl just in time to pull her into his arms, the impact of her small body hitting him barely registering. Eri struggled, trying desperately to escape. "Let me go. I don't want to hurt you too. I don't want to make you disappear too." She was already sobbing at the end of her words, the image of clothes sprawled on the ground and an empty room resurfacing in her mind. "Eri, it's okay. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." "You'll disappear too. I'm cursed, I'll make you disappear." Eri's broken voice and distressing words were like a knife to the heart. Izuku looked up, begging with his eyes for his hero to help him, only to see the man already had his hands full trying to calm a crying Nicola. Shooting him a grateful look for helping the girl, Izuku turned his eyes to his own pair of wet red eyes. "You're not cursed, Eri. I know what being cursed is like and is not like that. I don't know who told it, but they lied to you." Eri stopped sobbing. Even if her eyes still let tears fall, she locked her eyes with Izuku's own, the boy giving her a shaky smile. "I'm not cursed." The words came out as a whisper, but Izuku's sharp senses picked it clearly. The boy nodded while his smile gained a little more confidence. Izuku carefully picked his words, knowing he was about to trail the minefield the girl's fragile state of mind created to reach her heart. "Yes, Eri, what you have is an amazing quirk. It made the pain I was feeling go away. That's a very kind power. If something happened before that made you scared of it, it's only because you don't know how to use it yet. But can I tell you a secret?" Eri hanged into Izuku's every word, a growing hope starting to form. The question was answered with a small nod, her curiosity shining through her now more calm face. Izuku lowered his voice and put a hand on the side of his mouth. "I don't know how to use my quirk either." "You don't?" Eri tilted her head. "No, you saw what happened when I tried to use it. I hurt my arm. I know it's scary trying to use a power you don't know how to control. I'm scared of mine too, but we can learn how to handle them together. How does that sound?" Izuku saw Eri stare at him, The girl's gaze lasted a while before she gave a small, hesitant nod. Toshinori saw the scene play out, having calmed Nicola with what little he could make her understand of his words. The man gave out a content sigh. He made many mistakes in his life. Some he regretted to this very day and would for the rest of his life, but choosing his successor was not one of those. The boy had more problems than most, but he still had the strength to offer his hand to someone in need. I am sure I found the right one, Nana. You and the others can rest assured of that. Rapa let out a yawn while searching the fridge. The all-nighter he pulled thanks to his damn boss made him more hungry than tired, which was expected since he kept walking aimlessly while pretending to search for the kid the man was so obsessed with. He could still hear Overhaul fuming from here, which helped improve his mood, but after yesterday's fight, there was little that would sour it. And what a fight! Just remembering it made a smile spread on his face. Finally, he found someone that knew how to truly fight. Hunter, that guy had it. He had the eyes of someone that would fight to the death, doesn't matter whose death it was. That along with the fact he could keep up with him, he had to hold himself back as to not just go seeking him right now. Unfortunately, he was also the hero type, so he had to wait for him to get a goddamn license. He was sure the brat would get it, but the wait would be a drag. At least the fight would be even better after the wait. With happy thoughts of future battles awaiting him, Rapa picked a sandwich that someone left behind and made his way to his room. Sleeping would help the time pass faster, so that was what he was gonna do. After the situation on the beach, Toshinori cut Izuku's training session short. The man lending the boy and his charges a ride back home. Now on his own in his truck once more, Toshinori had time to think while driving back, and he sure needed it. The young and heroic boy he saw risking his life more than one time to correct his mistakes did all of that while plagued with a borderline insane problem. The boy was dragged for a city full of murderers and beasts. That would already be quite the conundrum, but he also tried to help people even then, another point in favor of his character if nothing else. But look how the universe repaid his noble act, making the boy put down the man he promised to save, and then discovered he did it too late. The man had killed his wife, leaving his daughter all alone in an even more cruel world than the one Toshinori worked to protect. But his successor proved once again he was a hero by heart by somehow using his quirk to bring the girl back to this reality, sparing her of a future Toshinori didn't have the stomach to imagine. The man laughed at the unintentional pun. He literally didn't have the stomach to do anything anymore. Again, young Midoriya was in a situation he wasn't ready to face, and what he gets is for it to double in the form of another child running into him. The boy didn't even ask this time. He fought tooth and nail to protect someone he could, and the most surprising thing is that he succeeded. An accomplished pro-hero would have difficulty with a villain like the Yakuza. The members of the surviving ancient criminal group were all a danger, sometimes even a fatal one, but the boy took the odds and beat them. All this, and his successor did not have a single day of formal training. Toshinori couldn't wait for the day the boy was a full-fledged hero. Maybe he would be surpassed faster than he imagined. But that was in the future. In the present, a teen still in middle school desperately needed his help, and Toshinori couldn't call himself a hero if he didn't go to the boy's aid. Fishing out his phone, Toshinori pulled one of the contacts he knew by heart. The line quickly connected and he was greeted by a slightly hoarse and annoyed voice. Probably, because of the different time zones, Toshinori had called the man on the other side on an ungodly hour again. "Hello to you too, David." Toshinori chuckled. "Toshi? I didn't realize it was you. Sorry about that." The voice coming from his phone now sounded more alert and friendly. "It's fine. I know it's probably way past the time you should be sleeping now." The embarrassed splutter on the other side of the call made Toshinori laugh. "So, how are things going? Everything all right?" "Yes, everything is fine, if you don't count the council vetting my project, again." The angry shout only renewed Toshinori's laughter. "Come on, David, you know how things happen. You can't always win. Especially when a bunch of old and stubborn men are involved." "Are you calling me old and stubborn? Me? Never." Toshinori's voice had such a fake innocence no man on earth would believe his words were genuine. "Har har. You two aren't all that young anymore. What about you? Everything okay on the land of the rising sun?" That was the perfect opportunity to move the subject to what would end in one big favor that he would be owning his friend from past times. "Unfortunately, I can't say it is. That's actually the reason that I called you. I have one big problem that only a man of your scientific expertise can help solve." "Toshi, what did you do?" The accusing tone was understandable considering Toshinori's history, but this time unfortunately he wasn't the one in trouble. Me? Nothing. But there is a boy even younger than Melissa up to his neck in shit that I don't know even where to begin to help. Pardon my crass language. David, it's serious, it's bad, and if I don't help him soon then I don't know if there will be another chance later. The hero was now tightly gripping the wheel, his helplessness on all this showing now there was no one to see. For a long second, the line was silent, but then the voice that came from the other side was one from a man ready to do something stupid. I'm going there. No, before you start, I don't have anything to do until the next meeting, and if we are going to help this boy, I'll have to be there anyway. So this is what's going to happen. I'll reserve a flight to Japan, get some hours of shut-eye, then I'll start preparing my stuff to go when my brain starts to work on a decent capacity while you pass me the details, so wait for another call from me soon. Toshinori could hear the man was already moving to do what he told him, and once more he thanked whatever higher power gave him a chance to meet his friend all those years ago. Okay. Thanks David, you always have my back and I couldn't be more grateful for it. Toshinori blinked the wetness out of his eyes. Don't mention it, now I have to go. Toshi, we'll help that boy, or die trying, so don't you dare blame yourself for all the problems he has. I know how you think and I'll be there to beat the depressing thoughts out of your thick skull. Toshinori knew he would, he always did. You always had a soft spot for children, not Tad. I'm any different. See you soon David, he finished the call. After All Might dropped them on his house, Izuku was completely drained. A night awake plus all that happened on the beach left him physically, mentally, and emotionally tired. The only thing he wanted was to drop on his bed and sleep, but unfortunately that was impossible, as succumbing to slumber was a death sentence for him now. At least it was only him. Eri and Nicola didn't have any problem crawling back to his bed and falling asleep immediately. Izuku quietly changed into his new and bigger school uniform and left his room. On the way to the door to face another hopefully boring day of classes, he met his mother in the kitchen. Hey mom. The woman let out a small yelp and turned. Izuku. You scared me, I didn't hear you. Sorry, he chuckled, I'm going to school, can you keep an eye on Eri and Nicola while I'm gone? Sure sweetie, stay safe. Inko's smile made Izuku hide his grimace at her words. I'll try. Izuku was almost dead on his feet by the end of the day. After he stumbled his way through the day, he realized he would need something to help him face the sleepless nights that awaited him while All Might tried to find someone that could help him. The last registered world record of longest time without sleep was from before Quirk's, timing a little more than 11 days if his research was right. If Izuku would need to be awake and minimally functional for even half this time, he would need to prepare. So quickly making a mental list, Izuku sent his mom a text explaining he wanted to buy a couple of things and he may come home late. The woman replied that she was fine with that as long as Izuku was careful and don't worry about the girls. After the day together they were starting to get along, so even while they might get a little anxious about him not being there for a little longer, it shouldn't be a problem, at least for now. With everything set, Izuku made his way to the shops with the supplies he needed: coffee, energy drinks and supplements, eye drops, and more ended in his backpack. With wallet lighter and bag heavier, Izuku started to make his way back home, using the side streets and alleys to dodge the crowded night streets. Izuku hoped he could stay awake for the time needed to All Might to get him help, but with his luck, he knew it was improbable. So another trip to Yamamkot probably would happen. In that case, the boy had to continue trying to find a solution on that side. His best bet was still the healing church, but if it proved to be a dead end, maybe Eileen could help him. If he found her again. Izuku's train of thought came to a crashing stop when he crashed on someone. Both parts stumbled. He was about to apologize when their eyes met. Tired green and slitted yellow. A smile of sharp fangs made Izuku freeze, but then his hunter instincts roared. He moved, his hand already grasping his weapon, a silvery sword clashing with a glinting knife. You're cute, but you would be even cuter if you're covered in blood. The cheerful voice didn't match the ominous words. The happy schoolgirl's face didn't match the bloodlust she was oozing. Izuku's tired and done brain supplied him with an answer. A pity that it was the wrong one. I don't think so. When I'm covered in blood I look like a bad horror movie character. The fanged smile only grew. Really, show me. Izuku deadpanned. I shouldn't have said that. The girl attacked again, Izuku quickly parrying her blade with his. His brain already was analyzing the situation he somehow found himself in. Both were armed. He had the vantage in reach. but her had more speed with a smaller and lighter blade. More slashes, more sounds of metal clashing. He had to keep his distance and wait for a chance to run. You're not that bad, could use some work though, maybe we could do this more. If you bleed a little I can even give you some tips. My name's Toga Himiko. Tell me yours now so we can be friends, the girls happily said while lunging at Izuku. The boy sidestepped. In his exhaustion he hadn't realized he started speaking. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you. When the girl slightly blushed and bashfully smiled, Izuku knew he made a mistake. I hate myself. It's good to meet you too, Izuku. Her smile was too bright for someone trying to stab him, but at least she wasn't cursing him like Yamamites. Izuku actually didn't know what was worse. Can you at least say why do you want to stab me? Izuku was genuinely curious about the reason, even if his brain was working overtime for a way out of this mess. Why? Because blood is so cute. And you will be cute covered in it. If I can get a drop or two for me then even better, I'm sure it will taste delicious. At every word she accelerated her swings, until finally, Izuku missed a counter for a millimeter, just enough for Toga to cut his cheek, a trail of red beginning to flow from it. Toga took a deep, shuddering breath. Izuku blinked, and that was all the time the girl needed to be right in front of him. His first instinct was to slash with his sword, but he held himself back. This wasn't Yamam. He wouldn't kill anyone here. Izuku's mental dilemma gave Toga the chance to reach even closer, and with a fluid movement, she licked the blood on his cheek. The girl opened her mouth to say something, but she never got the chance. Her eyes glossed over, and Izuku's blood froze. Like a puppet with its strings cut, the girl started to fall. Izuku abandoned his blade to catch her, praying to whatever higher being liked to torment him to prove his fears wrong. As if whoever listened laughed at the boy's suffering, the body in his arms started to spasm. From the edge of his vision, he could see mist creeping over them. Blood ministration, the two words echoing on his mind. Looks like another hunter joined him in his torment. Himiko's body crashed to the ground, blood pooling from the various bullet wounds that littered it. She had to admit, while sniping with a minigun sounded impossible, that guy on top of the tower sure could pull it off. The pain was horrible, but the failure felt so much worse. After Izuku tried so hard to get the beasts and the gun's attention off her so she could press ahead, she couldn't even reach halfway to the tower where their enemy was. Now she was going to die again. It was what, the 8th time? 9th? Huh, and that's because she thought it would be all fun and blood when they started? Izuku tried to make her understand the gravity of the situation the moment she woke in the hunter's dream. Well, after he cried and apologized to her for dragging her into this. What was a little funny considering she was the one to stab him, but Izuku was weird and cute like that. He tried to help her. He gave her his old saw cleaver. He bought a hunter's pistol and a proper hunter attire. The messengers on the bath called it a Yamam hunter attire and tried really hard to bargain an extra couple blood echoes out of it, and she really looked good in leather even if it was a little dirty. He tried to explain how things worked in Yamam so she wouldn't suffer as much as he did. But did she pay him any mind? No, she was so captivated by the hunt, the freedom to go after as much blood as she wanted, that she treated it like a game. And how did that end up? With her getting her head caved in by a brute with a brick on her first fight. It was as painful as it was embarrassing. Her first death, that sure snapped her out of the merry fantasy she was in, and while she broke down crying after reviving aside a lamp, Izuku came running all the way back and helped her again, holding her body while she rode the feelings of what was one of the worst moments of her life, and that was saying something, considering all the crap she has been through. When she finally got a hold of herself, she started to be useful and listened to the boy that was a lot smarter than he gave himself credit. And they slowly started to make their way through TH's dreadful city, meeting some sane people, or as close sane and as close to people as the inhabitants of Yamam could get. It seemed like things wouldn't be so bad. Then they reached this place and that goddamn bastard with a minigun and more bullets than anyone had the right to have started to rain quicksilver on them. Izuku being the softy he was tried to talk things out first. That was one death. Then they tried to run past the gun range only to find that there were a lot of beasts in the way. Another death. Then Izuku tried to use his quirk to get to the top of the tower, and to be fair he did. But with both his legs broken he couldn't quite stick the landing. Yet another death as she alone got overwhelmed by beasts. She tried to ask Izuku if he could use his quirk without the bone-breaking part, and he said that probably yes, he just didn't know how. For someone with such a strong power it was normal to don't have much on the terms of control, as where could you train to throw a punch that could topple a building? Speaking of which, she gave the idea of him bringing down the tower, but he countered saying that would only block their way forward and attract every beast in the city. Now here she was, looking like a Swiss cheese and bleeding to death while Izuku probably was having his insides clawed off. It was horrible, all of it, but at the very least she wasn't suffering alone. She would wake up and Izuku would be there scribing in his notebook and trying to come up with another plan. Even in all the pain there was the silver lining. She now had someone that cared about her, so maybe that was why she felt better now with life slowly being drained from her body than when she was aimlessly wandering the streets with only the ghosts of her past to make her company. Izuku was in way over his head. That was a normal part of his life, from wanting to be a hero even while quirkless, to being dragged into Yamam and having to scrap his way through the hunt, to bringing 2 little girls to his house and promising that he would take care of her even while he couldn't even take care of himself. He was feeling 7 different flavors of panic, but that was a given. So he'd soldier on and try to avoid falling apart any more than he already had, which had mixed results. But when All Might said he may know someone that could help, Izuku thought there was finally some hope for him, and on the same day he met Himiko. And he realized she nagged him so much to call her by her first name he was doing it even in his head. Their first encounter was not one that left a good impression, with her trying to stab him and all that, but then she swallowed his blood and all hell broke loose. He caused her to be trapped by the dream. He was responsible for putting her through the same torment he was facing. He didn't care that she was the one that did the ministration even if she didn't know anything. The cause of it all was still him and he wouldn't want to inflict this type of suffering on anyone. So he did what he could with the hand he was dealt. He tried to explain to her and make her understand what she was about to walk into, tried to prepare her for the monsters that they would face. He tried but he failed. Even while arming Himiko with good gear. And he had to admit she was better at using it than he was. Especially the gun. She still had her first death on her first fight, all because he couldn't get her to listen to him. After all, why should anyone care about what he said? When he rushed back to the lamp he found Himiko curled like a ball while hugging her knees and crying, and that pained him. It hurt knowing that someone was suffering because you didn't do enough. It hurt knowing it was your fault. And it hurt much more knowing it was only the beginning. But he wouldn't let her face the pain alone. He could promise that at least. So he slowly sat at her side and held her while she faced the realization she died, only to rise again, only to be trapped in this hell again. After that they got on a similar wavelength and started to work together, which went surprisingly well. Himiko was fast and she was skilled with her weapons, and Izuku being more strength and power focused led to them covering each other's weaknesses and slaying beasts like a well-oiled killing machine. It wasn't perfect, there were some bumps and close calls along the way. But everything considered the two of them were faring fairly well. Then they reached this part of the city, and discovered the soul-crushing despair a man with good aim, a Gatling gun and enough bullets could inflict. All that he tried, from diplomacy to trying to use one for all, failed, horribly. When Himiko suggested to destroy the building, a part of him, a small and vindictive part of him, wanted to do it. Fortunately the bigger and rational part of his brain shot down the idea before he could do something stupid. As much as he wanted to smash that tower and everything in it to Kingdom Come, the focus was getting past this area and progressing further, to hopefully find the pale blood and escape this nightmare once and for all. So now, after another failed attempt, Izuku sat up after coming back to the land of the living, holding his neck on the place a beast bit his jugular off with one hand and opening his notebook with the other, and started to formulate another approach. Himiko was already at his side trying to peek over his shoulder, humming some random tune while she watched him try to crack this particularly difficult and painful puzzle. "Are you sure this will work?" Himiko asked while checking her pistol one last time. "No, but I'm getting short on ideas," Izuku answered while lighting the Molotov on his hand. The plan was simple on paper. He tries to use the smallest percentage of one for all he can. With his wonky control this could be anything from nothing at all to the whole damn thing. To throw the incendiary artifact from his hand to the top of the tower. Using the resulting opening they would rush to the base of the building and make their way up, Himiko dealing with the beasts while Izuku healed himself. Just the cost of the blood vials he was about to consume made his heart clench. Nodding to each other, they started. Izuku winding his arm and powering up the quirk he received. With a throw so strong a cloud of dust rose from the resulting air current. Izuku saw the bottle fly while his arm felt as if someone dropped molten iron on it. It wasn't completely mangled, but it sure was broken. He used, more or less, 30%. It was a little under a third, he was sure. The moment the bottle hit the tower roof and the flames rose, they moved. Himiko took the lead and started to slice and dice everything that moved while Izuku was already using the second vial. The sounds of bones snapping back into place coming from his arm like macabre firecrackers going off. How much time do you think this will gain us? Izuku divided his attention in healing, following Himiko and watching the sniper, if he could be called that. If I was a betting girl, Himiko sing-songed as she chopped a beast head off, the little feral beings being a mix of a short human with a furry and blood-craving dog, I would say that we have 10 seconds. Hundreds of mathematical calculations passed through Izuku's brain, from the distance they still had to cover, the number of beasts in their way, the time to move the minigun into position to the speed of the bullets to reach them, and he reached the glorious conclusion they could do it, barely. True to his prediction, on the last 10 meters they heard the sound of the gun firing before they saw the bullets. Pushing their blood-augmented speed to the limit, they reached the base of the building and luckily a safe place out of their sniper's sights just when the projectiles started to hit the ground. Hitting the wall, both young hunters breathed deeply and gave themselves a second to enjoy their victory, a short second as from inside the building the growls of new enemies started to sound. It's going to be a long way up, right? Izuku said floridly. Yup. Good news. They reached their main source of bullet death. Bad news. He has more guns. Himiko would be the first to admit she was wrong about the stake thing the guy was using. It looked ridiculous but sure packed a punch, as Izuku could attest, and the hole in his left shoulder too. Another thing that was new was fighting someone on a rooftop. The constricted space turned things interesting, as one misstep would lead to a very painful fall. The random thought gave her an idea. Izu, get down. She barely finished speaking and he was already ducking, leaving her with the perfect shots. First from her gun to make the other hunter, or at least she thought he was a hunter, even if his weird talk of leaving the beasts alone kinda go against it. Fall back, closer to the edge. Second was her dashing, jumping and doing a dropkick on his chest. She fell to the ground on her back, wide open for a counter-attack, but she succeeded in her little scheme. While the guy was only sent skidding back, it was just enough to push his feet out of the roof floor. Himiko looked at the dark sky while the amazing sounds of screaming and then splatting reached her ears. Glancing at her companion upside down, she giggled, and down he goes. Izuku for his part only stared at the ledge for a long second before joining Himiko on the ground, the boy putting his heavy weapons aside and sprawling at her left. They stayed silent for some minutes, just looking at the sky above, but then Izuku said, "We killed someone." His voice sounded pained, but more than that, it sounded tired. Himiko knew where this was going, and she wouldn't let the boy that had broken arm for her not 20 minutes ago hate himself for something stupid. She rolled until she was above him, pushing herself up with a hand while the other poked his nose. "Nope, I killed someone." Izuku's embarrassment from their position almost broke the self-hatred he was feeling. "Almost. I helped, and we're in this together, so I won't let you take all the blame." His words only made the girl above him giggle more. "You're so cute. But if that's true, then you can't blame yourself over this. You tried to talk, the other guy chose to not hear you. I know that's a mistake from personal experience." She plopped herself on him, laughing loudly when Izuku stiffened. "You're a good guy. If people want to be stupid, then it's not your fault. You have this golden and bleeding heart that worries even for people you shouldn't." Himiko patted his chest, her words carrying more weight than both of them would have thought. Izuku knew he couldn't waste time crying, not in this place, not when there were people counting on him to go back home, but he was ever the cry-baby. With muffled sobs and wet eyes, he cried for yet another life lost in the accursed city of Yamam, and yet another piece of himself that was lost with it. Himiko held him tight while he spilled tears, like he had done for her not that long ago, even if it felt like a lifetime in the distant past. Both almost missed the shift in the air, the sensation of falling through a thin veil of water and mist, the sentiment they would soon recognize of escaping the bloody hunt to live one more day in the sun. Inko was getting worried. She fortunately got both Eri and Nicola to sleep, probably because they had been up since early, but now she had full liberty to worry. Izuku hasn't come back yet. It was almost 1 in the morning and he was who knows where. She tried to call him but none of her calls connected. She didn't know what was worse, that something happened with him here, or if he ended somehow back in the place he described as what Inko could only imagine as a nightmare. She was about to call the police to at least do something when a thud came from his bedroom. Rushing there in case one of the girls had fallen from bed, what she found filled her with both extreme relief and motherly worry. Her son was on the ground, back in the strange clothes of his, and glued to him was a teenage girl with a leather attire similar to his. "I can explain," he yelled in what was a combination of embarrassment and panic. Inko was sure she would still hear these words a lot. Toshinori always found himself a little giddy when going to a crowded place in his skeletal form, no one guessing the fragile man was the #1 hero, the child in him comparing it with the old pre-Quirk hero comics. He was now in the airport waiting for his friend with a big plastic toy shield with a large sticker of the United States flag on it, an old joke he had with his partner from other times. He was waiting calmly for the plane passengers to disembark, but he couldn't help but glance at the clock and ask himself, how long has his successor gone without sleep? Did the boy slip up and end in the hellish dimension his quirk sent him again? Was it even a quirk or something from the other side dragging him there? Okay, the last one seemed a little far-fetched, but one thing he learned as a hero is that anything could happen when the topic was screwing you over. Breaking out of his thoughts, Toshinori saw people starting to stream out of the gate, and it took barely a minute to spot him. Good old David Shield in all his nerdy glory. The man looked like he had too little sleep and too much coffee. His brown hair was a mess and his glasses were drooping to his nose. The top buttons of his shirt were in the wrong order, leaving one hanging loose. Toshinori didn't need to be a forensic scientist to guess the smudges in his jeans were from some much-needed caffeine, and his sneakers were tied by an unidentified type of knot that the man would have great problems later trying to undo. Toshinori waved the plastic shield over his head, trying to get the man's attention, and he did, but also from what was probably the reason for his friend's current state. The blonde young woman behind him, with glasses and blue eyes similar to her father, but wearing a much more clean outfit. A zip-up leather jacket, skinny jeans and perfect clean and tied purple shoes. Melissa sure had grown a lot since the last time the hero had seen her, and her brilliant mind was sure to be even sharper. When she saw him her eyes gradually widened, he could almost see the pieces falling into place on her mind. David sure noticed as well, if his expression of complete panic was any indication, that his daughter figured it out. They couldn't exactly blame her, she knew the man since she was a child and buff or not she would have noticed, especially with him holding the recurring joke of them over his head. Toshinori sighed, well, it was better she learned now than later, but the circumstances could be better when they weren't on the clock with the well-being of his successor dependent only on the fact he didn't sleep. Which should be fine if he hasn't probably gone more than 4 days without it. His secret weakened state leaking to someone that was trustworthy was a small sacrifice to pay. That's crazy, I still can't believe you could keep it a secret for so long Uncle Might. Melissa said from the backseat. The three were on Toshinori's truck after a quick stop in his house, where both shields would stay during their time in Japan. Why don't people believe I can be sneaky when I want to? The man huffed. David laughed. He was in the passenger seat taking in the sights of the different country, even if there wasn't much to see on their way to Dagoba Beach where they would meet Izuku. The boy had sounded dead tired on the phone, both physically and mentally, but he assured the hero he was handling it and that he and his small charges are fine, but that another complication has come up with their interdimensional problem. So, why did Dad leave everything he was working on to come here? I'm pretty sure it wasn't just for visiting you. Melissa asked while bending forward to stare at her uncle in all but blood. Toshinori put a hand over his chest, your words wound me, but you're right. He saw David turning to also look at him from the corner of his eye. An emergency has come up and I don't have nearly enough math to deal with it. You explained the basics over the phone, but are you sure of it? A different dimension? David asked, more than a touch of doubt in his tone. Toshinori nodded, not noticing Melissa's wide eyes. I'm sure. Young Midoriya was pretty vivid in his description of the events, and there's what he found in that place to corroborate his claims. He had to take a deep breath to keep his voice even. There is a little girl, probably 6 years old. He saved her from that place when both of her parents died. He chose to let the fact the boy had to put down the girl's father unsaid. It wasn't something they needed to know, and his successor was already ashamed of it even if it was the right call with the options he had. Both shields breathed sharply. The idea of a child losing her family and being somewhere where no one could help, or almost no one. They didn't even met the boy but their opinion of him was already really good. There wasn't many people that would look out for others while trying to deal with their problems. Specifically one as big as being stranded in another plane of existence. Is she okay? Melissa asked. Yes, young Midoriya is taking good care of her. He is capable of speaking her native language, somehow, and is slowly acclimatizing her. It also helps the girl. Nicola, has someone in similar conditions along with her. Toshinori glanced at his passengers and saw the raised eyebrows, questioning him, and with not a small dose of pride he explained. A day later young Midoriya had a run with a girl, the same age as Nicola I would guess, that was running from the Yakuza. After dealing with her pursuers the boy brought her in too. Giving himself a second to enjoy their dumbfounded faces, Toshinori laughed, saying after a minute, "Yup, the boy is pretty impressive, right?" "That's one way to put it," David said after recuperating from the surprise and repositioning his glasses back into place after they almost fell. "And you said he isn't even in high school yet?" Toshinori hummed positively, "And he will sure be even more impressive by then, but we have to help the kid get that far first." His tone became serious, the other two noticing the change in the air. "From what he told me, that place, Yamam, just the name sent a chill down all of their spines, is a special type of hell only few could be capable of coming back in one piece. Dave, I wouldn't want to end there, even after all I saw. It's no place for a teenager with so much life to live." He faced feral animals ranging from dogs to what I could only imagine being a mix of a deer, a bear and a wolf the size of a two-story house, madmen armed and out for blood, and even the architecture of the damn city. I saw a map he made. A surrealistic painting makes more sense than that place. Melissa became pale with all that was suddenly dropped on her, but David just took a moment to take it in and decide he is doing something about it, and that something is helping. "That's sure not a place to anyone to be. I will pull a favor from a friend so we can get a lab to work to make sure the boy isn't going there again. The trigger for the warp is he falling asleep, correct?" As Toshinori solemnly nodded, he had to take a moment to make some quick calculations and grimace. If he is trying to avoid going there, this means he hadn't slept in 79 hours, from the time of our first call to now. As his friend shook his head, he knew it was worse. "He had already gone a full day without sleep before I called you. So put a good 24 or more hours in that, and the boy is training to get in a hero school, even if it's probably more of an excuse to not think of what he saw in that place." Melissa was now getting extremely worried, so it wasn't a surprise when she almost threw herself over the front seats and yelled, "He is suffering from sleep deprivation and still doing physical activities. This is dangerous. Why didn't you stop him?" To his credit, Toshinori didn't even flinch at her outburst. Young Midoriya needed something to focus his mind, so he didn't dwell in what he had to face in that place, and to keep him active and not let his mind slip. A second he fell a little too far into slumber could mean a trip back to the other side again. David had to agree, even if begrudgingly. It's a stopgap solution, but the best you all could do. Now we have to work fast so his condition doesn't become even worse. When Melissa heard her father say, "We," while looking directly at her, she couldn't believe. "You want me to help?" David nodded. "Well, you were pretty insistent in coming along, and we're on the clock, so all help is welcomed. You can count on me." Melissa only wasn't more happy about working with her dad because someone was in trouble, but she was still elated by the opportunity. Toshinori chuckled. "Good to see you're on board too, because we're almost there." The trash-filled beach was already in sight. "Don't worry, young Midoriya, help is coming." Izuku was tired, physically, mentally and emotionally tired. After returning, he first had to explain Himiko to his mother, what was an experience, then he had to ease Nicola and Eri to her presence, which was another difficult experience. Then he had to convince Himiko that she couldn't drink the blood vials from their very limited stock just because she wanted to, which was a hell of an experience. Surviving all that, he did what he could to make his hunting partner feel welcome in her new home, as when the girl had said she had been living in the streets before meeting Izuku, his mom had very kindly said Himiko was staying with them and that refusing wasn't an option. After that, things had gone surprisingly well. School was barely an afterthought that he saw passing in a progressively more tired haze, as Izuku wasn't giving the idea of sleep any attention for fear of another trip to Yamam. Luckily, his long nights of fighting the basic human need of rest were now a lot more tolerable with company. Himiko and him would have extensive and quiet talks about any possible subject they could think of, which led to them knowing each other quite well. Izuku would be the first to admit Himiko's story had brought him to tears, more than one time, because how could it not? The girl was oppressed all her life for being different, just like he had. After debating with himself, he decided to give her his story too, except for the secrets not easy to tell, but everything else, she now knew. He was glad he found someone that understood him at some level, and she was too, if her new clinginess to him was any sign. The girl even had offered to stab anyone that bullied him in school, which was strangely heartwarming, but he had to turn the offer down. Now there they were, in Dagoba, waiting for All Might. Himiko was with both Nicola and Eri at a safe distance. The teen was nursing a cup of coffee to compensate for the lack of sleep, even if the heavy and dark bags under her eyes let it obvious she was just as tired as him. Izuku was standing in the middle of a clearing in the Thrash Mountains he had painstakingly carved, working on the same thing he had in the last days, controlling one for all. Just the price of the blood vials used in this little project of his made his metaphorical wallet cry in despair. The concept of blood echoes were still a little fuzzy, but in the end it was a type of currency that he and Himiko had literally killed for, so Izuku thought it was justified to feel a part of him hurting when he had to spend them, especially to something that until now only gave them loses. He wouldn't let it be for nothing though, he could already keep the current at an almost manageable level, so all he had to do now is avoid letting it fluctuate to a higher threshold he was capable of handling. It was easier said than done, but Izuku was stubborn enough to succeed. Glaring at one of the many fridges this place held. Really, that was the 20th fridge he found. Why were there so many of the things here? Izuku took a deep breath and used. The same feeling of molten lava flowing through his veins, the same rush of power that made him feel like he could smash his way through anything, but he didn't let himself get lost in it, letting only the smallest stream flow. Maybe 3%. No, 4% he was sure. He held it in place for a second. With all of his fingers glowing with power, he closed his hand and threw a punch. With a sound of metal being torn, Izuku found himself with his arm buried inside the metal appliance almost to the elbow, and finally he could feel he didn't break anything inside his arm. Laughing only a little maniacally, he tried to pull his arm out. I did it. It's just a small part, but I did it. From the back he could hear Himiko cheering. Trying his best he retrieved his arm from the metal appliance, looking at the hole in it and then his unharmed arm. He grinned. It was a small step, but it put him one step closer to his dream, and it was another weapon against whatever the bloody hunt of Yamam throw at him. Toshinori parked the car in the sideway, the view of the trash-filled beach greeting him and his extended family. We're here, he announced while getting out of the truck. David and Melissa quickly followed. Are you sure that's the place? Melissa said while making a face at the stench of rust in the air. Toshinori was about to answer when the sound of metal being torn apart reached their ears. He quickly made his way to the stairs down to the beach. Stopping in the first step he stared wide-eyed at the scene that greeted him. His successor was using one for all, only in his arms and not much of it, but enough for his veins to glow red and his hands to destroy the remains of an old car. A smile bloomed on the hero's face. The boy wouldn't stop surprising him, it seemed. The moment was broken by the cold barrel of a pistol touching the side of his neck. What are you doing here, mister? Stalking someone is not nice. The happy giggle of a girl didn't fit the situation he was in, but looking down to the pale teenager that should be Izuku's age he saw how her sharp smile promised to end him if he dared to move. Himiko. What I said about threatening people with guns. Izuku's voice broke the quick but deadly impasse. The girl, Himiko, pulled the old-styled pistol back and huffed. Relax, Izu. It's not even loaded, is it? She brought the gun to her face and eyed the inside of the barrel to see if a bullet was or not there. Izuku rushed at her and took the firearm from Himiko's hands before a disaster could occur. That's it. You're grounded. No guns until I say so. What? That's not fair. She pouted while crossing her arms and glaring at Izuku. The boy held his ground in a surprising display of confidence, or maybe exhaustion, as the bags under both their eyes made clear. Life isn't fair, he said, putting the gun away, Toshinori getting another small headache when he saw it turning into mist. Young Midoriya, I think we have some introductions to make. Toshinori took all that happened in stride. Honestly, in his career, he got held at gunpoint so many times it didn't even bother him anymore. Izuku looked at him, then behind him to the two shields who had watched the interactions with wide eyes. The boy blinked slowly, his tired mind trying to process who was before him. When it did, his eyes lit up. That's David Shield. He not only made all your costumes since your debut in America but was your sidekick at the time. I need an autograph. Izuku once more produced an item from the mist, a notebook, and rushed at the surprised David. Toshinori smiled, but it froze when Himiko poked him. Costumes? Are you a hero or something? That would explain the smell of blood, she commented absent-mindedly. Shrugging dismissively, Himiko joined Izuku before Toshinori could even come up with an answer. The girl stopped beside her friend and watched as he overwhelmed the brown-haired man with questions. After 5 minutes of talking that went straight over her head, Himiko giggled, "I'm glad I took Eri and Nicola home. I'm sure they would be more bored than me." Izuku stopped his word avalanche and blushed. "You're mean," he grumbled. "No, I'm tired. Do we still have coffee?" Himiko blinked her eyes slowly, trying to keep them open. She never was one to pull all-nighters, even when she was on the run, so being awake for almost 30 hours straight after both of them came back from Yamam was hard, to say the least. The fear of going back was the only thing that kept them going, but Himiko was already nodding off more times than not. Izuku shook his head. "You drank the little we had left." Melissa was the one that noticed the sorry state the teens were in and suggested, "Why don't we go grab a cup and discuss how we can help with the problem Uncle Uncle Yagi told us about?" Izuku would have noticed the slip of the tongue if he was at full mental capacity, but he wasn't, so he only nodded. "Yeah, that would be good." "Come on, Toshi. You're buying us a coffee." David called his friend, who still hadn't rejoined the others from the scare of almost having his secret found out the second time in a day. Oh, I'm going." "Wait, why am I paying?" David smirked. "I didn't have the time to switch the coin before, so you as our host in this strange land will have to cover for us." He laughed when Toshinori tried to protest but gave up knowing he was right. "Get in the car, I know a place nearby." Melissa held the notes she took during Izuku's tale of the things that had happened since his first trip to Yamam. They were all in a private booth in a cozy cafe Toshinori frequented from time to time, enjoying some coffee, except Toshinori himself, who had gone for tea thanks to his condition. During the recollection of events, Melissa didn't want to sound uncaring or dismissive, especially when Izuku and Himiko saw her father and her as their only hope, but the list on her hand was something coming out of a dystopian fantasy book, or game if a developer liked to torture his players enough. "Are you sure you're describing the events in the most accurate way you can?" Izuku, who was nursing his second cup of coffee, nodded. "Yes, I'm leaving out the more graphic details." Himiko added, "Like how we ripped and tore our way through beasts to keep going. Or how a minigun shot hurts. Also, we should have taken it. I'm sure we could have used that thing." Izuku shook his head and said quietly, "It's not worth the effort, just the ammunition cost would make it situational at best." "Couldn't we sell it to the messengers in that pound?" For a second Izuku was quiet, then he facepalmed. "Why didn't I think that?" Toshinori interrupted then after a sip of his tea, "When you pick things from the mist, it's actually these messengers handing you them." David also asked something that was bugging him. "You said you understood the language of the city even though you have never seen it before, even if it has similarities to archaic English. Have you tried any other language? Maybe the effect had changed the structure of how your mind processed information instead of just adding some more. Some quirks work like that and it can help isolate how yours act." Izuku shook his head. When he was about to elaborate, Himiko cut him. Something had bothered her for a while, but just now she made it known. "Izu, isn't your quirk the glowy strength Y thing that broke your bones? What does that have to do with Yamam and the hunt and all that?" Izuku's blood froze. Panic settled in his mind. He glanced at All Might, but the man was in the same state as him. Toshinori cursed himself. He had been in such a hurry to get help he didn't even talk with Izuku of how they would keep one for all under wraps. With how Himiko seemed to be trapped in the same nightmare he was in, something that he still had a hard time accepting, it was obvious she would see him using the quirk, as it was a useful tool for their survival even with Izuku's lack of control. Izuku tried to come up with an excuse. "It's that, you see, my quirk," and failed miserably. Sighing, Toshinori decided to court his losses. He knew more people would know in time. Izuku would need his own circle of trust to help shoulder the burden. There was only one thing he needed to make sure of first. "Young Midoriya, do you trust young Toga?" he asked gravely. Izuku didn't hesitate a second. "I do." The steadiness of his voice surprised even himself, but he knew his feelings about the matter. "Himiko had my back even when things got grim. She is the first person in a long time I know I can count on no matter what happens. And wasn't that a novel experience? After being alone and ostracized by society at large since the day he was diagnosed as quirkless, he now had someone he could truly call a friend." No one was more moved by his words than Himiko herself. She too was in the same boat as Izuku. Having been demonized by something she had no control over, but now she had someone that saw her, all of her, and wasn't scared. It could be because he saw worse in that accursed city, It could be because he always tried to see the best in people. To her it wasn't important. She now had someone she could call a friend with no lies or masks between them. "Oh Izu. I love you too." She giggled, doubly so when Izuku blushed neon red and sputtered. Toshinori chuckled, but the levity of the room died with his next words. "We have to tell them, young Midoriya." Izuku's mind had gone haywire with Himiko's words, but Toshinori's were like a bucket of cold water. He felt like he was failing the man. He didn't have one for all for even a month and he already let the secret out. "I'm sorry. Don't be, it would have happened sooner or later." Toshinori shook his head and turned to the 3 other occupants of the table, who were all confused about what they were talking about. "What we'll tell you can't leave this table, for your own safety. Do not tell anyone about what we'll tell you, am I clear?" His tone was dead serious and for a good reason. One for all was a wonderful power, but it was also dangerous to all involved with it. David knew that when his friend sounded like that, it was a question of life and death. "Whatever it is, your secret is safe with us." Melissa nodded sharply at his side, the girl never having seen her honorary uncle so serious. Taking a deep breath, or as deep as someone with only one lung could take, Toshinori started. "My Quirk, or young Midoriya's now, is called One for All." Himiko stared Izuku in the eyes, the boy shrinking into himself because of the constant visual contact. After they had explained One for All and what it was to David, Melissa and her Himiko had been glaring at Izuku. Now they were back home and she had total freedom to chew him out. "You have All Might's Quirk, and didn't tell me before. You know, I feel cheated after your speech of how you trusted me. But," she shrugged, breaking the tension, "it's not like I asked." The 180 in her mood was so sudden Izuku almost got emotional whiplash. "You're not mad?" Himiko flopped on the couch. "Nah, okay maybe a little. But again it's not like it changes anything, right? We still have worse problems to deal with." Izuku sighed in relief. "Yes, you're right. At least things will get better now." Himiko deadpanned at him. "You just jinxed us." "I didn't," he said, then added under his breath, "I hope." "I heard that," the blonde girl said while giving Izuku a half-lidded glare. Sitting up she crawled at the side of the couch, closer to the recliner Izuku was on. "No more weird secrets. Okay. I think as partners we have to be honest. Super honest. So the next time something crazy happens to you, tell me," she complained while poking Izuku's cheek. Okay, I promise." He tried to defend himself weakly with his hands while chuckling defeatedly. "Good. Now let's watch a movie or something. If I don't have something to busy myself with I'm gonna fall asleep." Izuku smiled awkwardly. "Fine. We have to wait until tomorrow so Shield-san can prepare to check us up." He slumped down. "The night will be long." He didn't know how truthful his words were. "Let me get this straight, we're trying to not go back to Yamam. To do that you want us to go back to Yamam?" Himiko glared at the 2 shields. That day Toshinori had fetched them at Dagoba Beach and brought Izuku and Himiko to David's borrowed lab. The place was a whole floor in a building in the center of the city, filled with such cutting-edge tech it looked like the interior of a spaceship. David had conducted a battery of tests in Izuku while Melissa did the same to Himiko. After 3 hours of being poked and prodded with things the teens didn't even know the names of, David had asked for a final test, and that was the reason for Himiko's current anger. Izuku put a hand on her shoulder. "It makes sense. If they want to know how to stop the transition we do from here to there they first have to know how the process works. And unfortunately, the only way of doing it is, well, doing it." He shrugged with a weak smile. "Exactly. I'm sorry you two have to pass through it again, but it will hopefully be the last time." David tried to light the situation, but even he wasn't fond of the idea. Sending 2 children to what he could only describe as a nightmare to fight for their lives was not something he could say he was fine with. Unfortunately, it was the only way. Melissa tried to give something that could help, even if a little bit. "You described all the times you came back as heavily emotional moments, so maybe try something along those lines. Maybe you can come back right after going in." Himiko grumbled, as if it was ever that easy. "Fine, at least we can finally grab that Gatling gun. Dibs on the blood echoes." Izuku was about to protest when he just accepted it and shrugged. "You can take them. Just buy some more ammo, please." "No promises," she sing-songed her response, and Izuku hoped she was joking. They were then guided by the youngest shield to a separated area. It had 2 medical beds with various apparatus attached to them and some machines that seemed to come straight from a sci-fi movie. Melissa turned to them and gave a weak smile. I know it's not what you wanted. Even if I don't believe everything you told me to the letter, I know you two are going through a hard time. I swear my father and I will do everything we can to help you too. Izuku tried his best to remain positive. He really did. We'll be in your care. Politeness was everything he could bring forward. Himiko didn't even try. This is gonna suck so much. She groaned and flopped in one of the beds. Chucking awkwardly, Izuku said to Melissa, don't mind her. In another room, Toshinori watched as David furiously typed on a computer. Trying to lighten up the mood, the emaciated hero said, the computer didn't do anything, you know. No need to smash every key. David snorted, that's rich coming from you. Mister, I'll call all my super moves smash even if they're just punches. I still remember when you spent a week with a map of the states trying to memorize all of them. Toshinori gave him a mock offended glare. You always remember the worst things, don't you? The genius sighed, and this will be one of them. I tried to get something, anything, from the tests to see any possible alternative, but beyond their blood being, I don't even have a word for that. I have nothing. Grasping the shoulder of his friend, Toshinori gave a firm nod. Have some faith in them. Young Midoriya will get back with young Toga, I'm sure of it. David gave a small smile. He's your successor after all. If he's anything like you, they'll be back in no time. He looked at Toshinori with complicated feelings. I still can't believe it, a quirk that can be passed ahead. It's something that needs some time to get around to. I remember when my master told me about it, I thought she was messing with me. Toshinori smiled at the memory. I would like to hear some more about that, hopefully when we weren't dealing with whatever this is, David said while staring intensely at the screen, where a feed of the room both Himiko and Izuku had fallen asleep was playing. The teens were slowly involved by a dense mist. When it faded, they were completely gone. Melissa entered the room and was greeted by the scene of 2 old men staring slack-jawed at a computer screen. What happened? David snapped from his stupor and typed with double his previous speed. Making sure he hadn't gone insane yet, he stopped in a specific frame, double-checked the readings and the image on the screen, and answered his daughter with a shaky voice. I honestly don't know, but we'll have to find out. Melissa frowned at how her father's voice cracked and got closer to see what earned that reaction. She glanced at the computer screen and frowned before her eyes widened. In the 2 mist-covered beds, hands, tentacles, and things only the form made her head hurt seemed to twist within. The most frightening part was how she could swear there were eyes looking back at the camera. Oh. That was all she could say. But what words could represent the mix of fear, dread, and worry inside her? Whatever that was, it just dragged Izuku and Himiko beyond their reach. Izuku huffed, sweat running down his brows. Himiko and he had made some progress after going back to the hunt. While Melissa's idea of forcing himself back into their word hadn't worked, they did grab the Gatling gun from the tower and sold it for a good price, enough to cover his use of blood vials to get the hang of one for all and then some. Himiko used a good chunk to augment herself with doll. The girl's change wasn't as drastic as his. She only grew a centimeter or 2, but she was now more fast and nimble than before, and considering just what Himiko was capable of when they met, that was quite the scary thought. After being properly equipped for continuing their path, the 2 young hunters got back to their grueling mission. Now in a lower part of the city that was infested with werewolves, and for Yamam that was saying something, Izuku paved the way with his small control of his quirk while Himiko supported him with her now frightening accuracy with a firearm. Are you okay? Himiko asked from his side, keeping a close watch on their surroundings. Yeah, just need a second, Izuku said breathlessly. While his new control was good enough to bring a surprisingly 5% of his power forward, the focus required to move it through his body tired him fast, beyond the problem of how slow it was to change it from one part of his body to another. Something that proved fatal a minute later. Izuku walked through the deserted street, the silence deafening. It was broken by the sound of a twig snapping under his boot. The young hunters almost jumped out of their skin from the scare, before they calmed down and thought themselves silly for being frightened by such a small sound. Izuku took another step. The front door of a house to his right burst into a shower of splinters and a werewolf flew at him. The boy and beast crashed into the ground. He barely managed to stop the fangs of the wolf with his blade. He tried to charge his arms with one for all, but the monster didn't let him, digging its claws into the teen's sides, breaking his concentration. Himiko didn't let the overgrown dog do whatever it wanted with her partner. She rushed at it and shoved the barrel of her gun into the side of its head before pulling the trigger. The werewolf had its brains splattered into the floor, going limp over the green-haired hunter. Izuku focused a fraction of the storm of power within himself into his leg and kicked the body off him. That ended up aggravating his wounds and he bled out before they could do anything. Back into the lamp, Izuku, sprawled into the ground, roared into the night, "Damn it. That's not the most welcoming sound." Himiko stared blankly at the mausoleum in front of them, from where gurgling growls that sent shivers up their necks came from. Izuku nodded. "No, it's not." He sighed deeply and prepared himself for what would probably be another death, and isn't brushing over his demise a reason of concern? Let's get this over with. They marched ahead, braving into the decrepit tomb. A pungent smell filled the air and clung to the cold stone. A dark purple gunk oozed out of every crack. In the center, towering over them both, was a deformed, quadrupedal creature whose skin was peeled off and hanged from its back. Much like the cleric beast that Izuku fought before, it also had a malnourished, skeletal appearance. From its body more of the dense goop that coated the whole place flowed. "I'm not touching that, good luck," Himiko said while opening fire. Izuku didn't have the time to complain as the blood-starved beast lunged at him. The boy threw himself aside, dodging the monster's claws, but not the purple waste that rained on him. Izuku felt his lungs burning from the smell while his body boiled. Whatever that gunk was, it's poisonous and painful. Himiko threw a Molotov at the beast, making it roar in pain and trash around. Izuku took the opportunity to gulp down some of the medicine they had found scavenging through the city, and the effect was instantaneous. He felt the blood in his veins settle and his bones stop aching. Turning back to the blood-starved beast, Izuku saw the flames burn away the waste and leave it vulnerable. Using one for all in his legs, he dashed ahead and swung his hammer, not being fast enough to power it up too. The attack connected and he heard something snap. Their harrowing enemy cried out before rampaging, thrashing around and covering everything in more poison. Izuku used his powered legs to get some distance. Regrouping with Himiko, the boy cursed under his breath. If only he could be faster on how he manipulated his quirk, or if he could do like the damn beast and coat all of himself with it like it did with its poison. "That's it," he exclaimed. "That's what?" Himiko asked without taking her eyes off their foe. "I have to be like that thing," Izuku said excitedly while pointing at the starving monster. The girl blinked and tilted her head. "No you don't, that thing is nasty. Are you okay? Did it hit your head?" Izuku slumped exasperated, but he didn't have the time to explain. The blood-starved beast threw itself at them again. This time they got out of the splash zone safely. The green-haired boy tried to focus, creating a mental image to help visualize what he wanted to do. When he used one for all, his veins lit up with power. Blood flowed through his veins to his whole body, so he tried to focus on it. His heart beated painfully fast, pushing the crimson liquid to every cell. He needed it to carry the spark of pure and concentrated might inside him too. Red glowing lines started to mark his body, slowly at first before spreading. The beast turned to him just when he felt it. Something clicked. Something changed. A shadow moved just at the corner of his vision. "Move," a whisper in the wind said, and Izuku obeyed. He shot forward, green arcs of lightning coating his form. In a blink, he crossed the distance and swung his Kirkhammer. With a speed something that big and heavy shouldn't be able to reach, the block of stone smashed into the blood-starved beast. Izuku felt something crunching and smiled. That was it. He could use the power trusted to him right. The happiness was brief, as a tidal wave of poisonous gunk burst from the monster, covering Izuku head to toe. He tried to jump back, but the sudden attack broke his concentration and made him drop the cloak of power he achieved. The blood-starved beast punished Izuku's mistake, grabbing the hunter with both arms. It brought him up and in a swift movement snapped its jaws. Izuku saw only darkness for an infinite and terrifying second, then he was once more at the side of a lamp with messengers basking in its light. He quickly scrambled to his feet, trying to do his cloak trick one more time so he could rush back. Himiko was still there, and if he got to her in time then maybe. His thought process was abruptly interrupted by another form materializing beneath the lamp's light. Himiko glared at the sky. "I need a bath, and to scrub my soul so maybe I can get all the goop off." Izuku fell down on his behind with a heavy sigh. That could have gone better. The blonde sat up and threw herself at her friend, glomping him tightly. You say that, but for 1 second you got full glowy on that thing. What did you do? Izuku chuckled embarrassedly. I think I figured it out. Instead of thinking of one for all like a special move I can use only on one part of me at a time, I have to see it as a complete thing that powers all of myself. Himiko hummed and nodded slowly. So that's what you meant with having to be like that dog. Makes sense and is a lot less disgusting. I prefer the pretty lightning a lot more than the goop. Izuku smiled. Me too. He raised his hand and let the cloak, something he still had to name, envelop him. Green arcs of energy danced over his fingers. Both Himiko and Izuku stared in wonder at the sight, a little bit of hope lighting up the cold and cruel night. On your left, Himiko shouted her warning, and just in time. Izuku, glowing with the green cloak of power he created, ducked a wild swing from the blood-starved beast. The hunter leapt to avoid the follow-up and struck with his Quirk hammer, making the beast stumble. Himiko lit a Molotov and threw it right in the monster's head, setting it on fire. The blood-starved beast howled in pain, shaking itself and making its poisonous sludge fly. Izuku ran back to dodge the splashes of gunk, but his new speed ended up making him crash into one of the room's pillars. The impact made him drop his technique, and just as he tried to put it up again, a claw slashed his back. Himiko shot the beast, trying to make it back off, but it accepted the wounds for the chance of ending one of its foes. The blood-starved beast grabbed Izuku with its clawed hands and repeatedly smashed him on the floor. When the boy could finally open his eyes, he was already back beside the lamp, messengers waving their bony arms at him. And that makes 12. Damn it. Izuku sighed, another death for the count. Why does it always have to throw goop at me? Himiko whined bitterly. She had died right after Izuku was taken out. The girl was fast, but Izuku had one for all, helping him move at a speed Himiko couldn't hope to match anytime soon, as getting caught by the blood-starved beast every time could prove. We need a new plan. Or we need something else to help distract that thing. The boy started to mutter while scribing in a notebook a messenger had passed him. You're not talking about asking help from that weird guy from the church, right? Himiko glared at Izuku, even if there was no real heat behind it. On the way there, they passed through an old church, where the duo met an executioner of the healing church named Alfred. The man had been amicable, and that was a novelty in that place, but something about him rubbed Himiko in the wrong way. Her distrust skyrocketed when he said to hunt vilebloods for the healing church, and even Izuku had noticed something wasn't right. They had parted ways after that, and Himiko had no intention of talking to Alfred again. We don't have many options, you know. Unfortunately, Izuku could use some more right about now. Fine, but I still don't like him, and I'm keeping my eye on him the entire time, Himiko pouted. Izuku raised his hands in surrender. I'm not asking you to. After we deal with that thing, we leave him, okay? You're lucky that you're cute and smart. Himiko's words made Izuku blush heavily. I see why you two requested my help. Alfred clicked his sword into his own Quirk hammer. That beast sure looks dangerous. The executioner exclaimed grimly, not having expected such a great beast in a place like that. Look out for the poisonous waste it throws around. Izuku warned Alfred with a frown. After backtracking and convincing the executioner to help, not that it took much, they had crafted a somewhat decent plan to hopefully bring the blood-starved beast down. Okay boys. Light him up, Himiko shouted, throwing a Molotov at the beast to gather its attention and mark the start of the hunt. Both Izuku and Alfred dashed ahead, taking pieces of parchment with resin on them. Applying the resin to their hammers set the weapons on fire. Now, Izuku activated one for all and leapt over the monster just as it tried to grab him. Alfred was still much surprised by the power the foreigner had, but his teachings of the healing church quickly made it clear it wasn't derived from blood, especially not from the vilebloods, thankfully. While such powers needed a sacrifice, the young hunter could use his at will with nothing but his seeming inexperience as a downside. Shaking his head from such distracting thoughts, the executioner rushed and swung at the blood-starved beast's side, timing it to hit just as Izuku struck its back. The combined attack sent the beast head over heels, leaving it open to two Molotovs to crash into its exposed gut. Take that! The huntress taunted, laughing and giggling as the beast flailed in pain. The monster got up after the flames subsided and tried to pounce at Himiko, only for Alfred's hammer to impact its leg and make it stumble. Izuku took the opportunity to strike the beast's head, sending it recoiling back. Himiko shot the back of the blood-starved beast's knees, making it fall over and leaving it vulnerable for Alfred to come in and plunge his sword in its head. Unfortunately, the bone was too thick to end the beast, but he was sure it had hurt if nothing else. Izuku smiled. With Alfred helping divide their enemy's attention, he had the pressure lessened on him. Thanks to that, not only had he not dropped his cloak of power one time, but he could attack freely when it was distracted. Himiko, too, had more freedom to move and aim her shots, scoring more and more hits. That made Izuku consider inviting the executioner to tag along, as a group of three seemed so perfect, but then he remembered what the man said. When talking about the vile bloods, Alfred had a fanatic glint on his eyes the two hunters had only seen on the madman stalking the streets of Yanarm. Maybe it was better to err on the side of caution than to find themselves with a beast in their midst. Just as the boy resolved himself, his foe howled. The blood-starved beast started to thrash around violently, sending gunk in all directions. Ew! Himiko quickly hid behind one of the pillars of the mausoleum, not wanting to get covered in goop again. Why doesn't this thing die? It is getting a tad annoying. Alfred huffed, having blocked a blob of gunk with his Kirkhammer, which unfortunately put the fire on the weapon out. Heads up! Izuku yelled. The boy had used the commotion to get some distance and use one for all to rip off a loose piece of a pillar, then throw it at the beast. The flying debris practically exploded on the monster, stopping its rampage. I got it! Alfred was quick to adapt to the change of pace in the battle, switching to his sword and slashing at the beast's heels. It fell one more time and Izuku had plenty of time to strain his control of one for all to punch his enemy's head harder. Ouch, 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 ouch! He quickly retreated, having broken a finger or three in that stunt. His cloak was down again, but this time he had Alfred to cover his retreat and buy the boy some precious time to heal. Himiko approached her partner while providing cover fire to their tag-along. What did I say about breaking your bones? It wasn't a question. Sorry. Oh, I can't get mad at you. Give me your ammo, pretty please. The blonde was already on her last bullet, which she promptly fired at the blood-starved beast, scoring a headshot that made it recoil. Here. Hey, can you buy me a minute? Izuku asked while trying one more time to focus and surround himself with his given power. For you? Even two, Himiko giggled while quickly reloading. Breathing deeply, Izuku felt his veins light up before arcs of viridescent lightning began to jump all over his body. Focusing back on the fight, he saw that a hot minute must have passed as now the blood-starved beast was at the other side of the mausoleum and was covered by a cloud of toxic fumes. Oh, crap. Time for Plan B. Himiko, get ready. Alfred, clear the way. At his command, the executioner quickly retreated, getting out of the line of fire while the girl maintained the monster's attention on her. Izuku got a running start, closing in on the decrepit beast. With a leap and a front flip, the hunter planted his feet on the ceiling, right on top of his prey. Like a spring uncoiling, Izuku's legs pushed him to fall down like a meteor on his foe. The massive weight of his Kirkhammer crashed on its head, making an audible crunch of bones giving out. Himiko was ready for the moment the blood-starved beast fell, its now soft and vulnerable head at arm's length. Bye-bye, sucker. She thrust a hand on and in the monster's head, reaching for something important to pull. By how it stilled and then crumbled in a motionless pile of rotten flesh, she did grasp something pretty important. That's what you get for throwing goop at me. Himiko snarked at the corpse while shaking the last fleshy bits off her gloves. Not bad if I say so myself. Alfred chuckled good-naturedly. A little help? Izuku's pained whimper broke the two victorious warriors from her merry atmosphere. The boy was laying on his back, his leg twisted just a little too much to be natural. I think I broke something, again. You think? Himiko rolled her eyes. What could she do with this dummy so he could learn that bones weren't meant to be broken, at least not his? Whoa. This is always a doozy. Himiko shook her head, getting rid of the rush canalizing blood echoes gave. She had a lot after killing the blood-starved beast, so after restocking their supplies, the girl decided to get a little stronger. Not everyone had a super quirk that made them punch down buildings. Not that her upgrades focused much on strength anyway. Himiko already realized her power-ups were all more focused on speed and agility, and something weird to her blood that made her bullets hurt more, but she would leave understanding that to Izuku. I was told the rush remains disconcerting for the most part. Doll gently held Himiko's hand to keep her steady. Could have told me sooner, Himiko pouted, earning a small smile from Doll. The blonde giggled. She had no one before, but now she had a list of the people she liked most in the world. First place was obviously Izuku, but the doll and Inko tied for second easily. Now that that business was taken care of, Himiko turned and rushed to the workshop. There, Izuku was sitting on the floor with stacks upon stacks of books all around him, mumbling something under his breath at a speed the girl didn't even bother to try following. The reason for that was the thing they got from the mausoleum their last prey resided in. On an altar at the back of the tomb, the two hunters found a golden chalice with scribings neither could read with it being so faded from age and scuffed from wear. Alfred, the suspicious executioner, said it was a Thumeru chalice, used for rituals and other fanatical mumbo-jumbo that Himiko didn't care to remember. Izuku thought it could be useful, so being the worrywart he was, the boy raided the hunter workshop for any clue of how it could be used and, most importantly, safely used. The vampire-like girl didn't think much of it. She would follow whatever Izuku decided to do. Her whole plan since learning better at the start of her hunt was that the green-haired boy knew best and that listening to him was the right thing to do. Did he make mistakes? Yes, but that was more of a case of hiccups along the way thing. Just look at their last fight. Would Himiko decide to call for help from the weird church guy? Never. But it was the right call in the end. Case in point, her patience and trust were rewarded when Izuku sprung up and grinned. That's it. What's it? The blonde perched herself on her partner's back to look over his shoulder while he explained what was in his mind, something that was starting to become routine. Izuku was so focused on his discovery he didn't even get flustered from the contact, something Himiko knew too well how to exploit. The Thumeru chalice is not just a fancy cup, it is a key. A key to what? If I'm reading this right, it should be to a form of dungeon or tomb. I'm not sure. Oh well. Izuku shook his head to help his thoughts get back on track. The important part is, we can use it to enter those places, and in them, there should be all kinds of useful stuff. How are you sure? Himiko wasn't really interested in it, she just wanted to keep hearing Izuku talking. If he said they were going somewhere, then the girl would go somewhere without questioning. The record said that the healing church was created to disseminate the cure of blood and that the blood they used came from there. Actually, most of Yamam was built on top of those dungeons, both for easy access and to keep outsiders away from it, at least that's what those registers say. He pointed to a page, and Himiko pretended to read it. Okay. But how dangerous is this place? Compared to the last one, we went at least. Izuku gave an uncertain shrug. The dungeons are divided by layers. The lower you go, the worse it is. I am pretty sure the first should be at most on par with what we already faced, but this is Yamam. He finished with misty and despair-filled eyes and a forced smile. The blonde patted the boy's fluffy hair. There, we can handle it. They couldn't handle it. Not more than they could handle all the rest, at least. While the enemies they faced within weren't anything too out of their usual playing field, the labyrinthian hallways and chambers filled with traps sure made their continued survival difficult. Worst, Izuku's lack of control of One for All made everything so much worse, with him crashing into walls and dropping the cloak of power he still didn't name all the time. The boy just decided to forego it altogether. It was mostly the right call, as they started to progress after it, but now all fights were harder than they could be. Not everything was bad news, thankfully. They had found some useful materials to strengthen their weapons, and everything they killed provided both hunters with loads of blood echoes compared to things on the surface. It was an overall net gain? Yes. Was it painful? Also yes, but better to suffer and have something to show for it than to just suffer. How much longer? Himiko whined. It is a first-layer dungeon, so I think we should be at the end. To prove his point, they found a large and ornate door at the end of the next corridor. Why'd I hear boss music? Izuku chuckled, happy to have his partner trying to liven up the mood. He sure needed it. If you're good enough to joke about it, then we can go in. Himiko shrugged, not like we have much choice. So, what's the plan? The inheritor of all might, unfortunately, drew a blank. He didn't have any information to use to formulate a strategy. Don't die? That's more like a general idea, but sure. Let's go with that. Himiko brushed his uncertainty aside. She was certain that Izuku would come up with something if things got too tough. Entering the room, they were greeted by a giant with a blade for arms leaping at them. Izuku used Alfred's trick and blocked it with the head of his Kirkhammer, giving Himiko the time to circle around it. The girl thanked her lucky stars that her outfit covered her mouth and nose because the stench coming from the giant was the one of something that died and was left to rot for a long while. It was big, ugly, and covered in dirty hags, but she doubted the smell was caused by it. The blonde didn't think it was too menacing, but after it crashed into Izuku and sent the boy flying at a wall, she knew it was strong. Himiko opened covering fire and gave Izuku a chance to get up and catch the breath that was forcefully driven out of his lungs. Observations already started to pile up in his mind. That thing was strong and faster than its size led to believe, also resistant as it didn't even flinch from the shots raining on it. No, Izuku saw that chunks were being blown off the monster form, then it clicked. The smell, the lack of reaction to pain, the lack of breathing. That thing was already dead, so it was an undead giant. Izuku couldn't even start thinking about how that was possible because not only it was a different type of giant than the ones they faced before, seeing that all of them were alive in some capacity, he didn't have any idea of how to kill something that was already dead. A little help. Himiko's yell helped him focus back on the present. If he couldn't kill it, he just had to make it not a threat anymore. How would he do that? Well, things stopped being dangerous when they were turned to fine mist most of the time. Izuku shot his blunderbuss at the undead giant's knee, ripping it apart and giving Himiko the chance to get distance. Get behind me. She did it, not hesitating a second even if the girl knew what he was about to do from the look she gave him and didn't like it one bit. Pulling his arm back and focusing, Izuku's veins came alive as he desperately tried to contain the power overflowing them. The output of One for All was as erratic as always when he tried to focus on only one part of his body, but Izuku didn't have the time to stop and activate his technique as the undead giant was already getting back up. The energy fluctuated, one moment just a single %, the next 70, then dropping to 20 before jumping up to 40. It was like playing a slot machine with his bones. If he was lucky he would only break a couple, if not then he would have a mangled arm and more costs with a ton of healing items. Making a quick prayer under his breath, Izuku threw his arm forward. It impacted the giant on the center of its torso, rippling like a lake's surface, then exploded. Izuku inhaled sharply through his teeth. He would say he nailed a 30-something% on that punch, so while his arm wasn't completely mangled it sure was damaged. The body parts that were still intact and the gore of the ones that weren't fell, indicating the end of the battle. Before Izuku could sigh in relief, he gasped in pain from his arm, getting a needle roughly inserted into it. Himiko glared at the boy. Stop breaking your bones. Sorry. He lowered his head, sufficiently chastised. She stabbed another blood vial into his arm, earning a yelp. Himiko let out a tired sigh. We're done now, right? As if mocking her, a door on the opposite wall from where they came in opened, showing a stairway going deeper inside. Izuku gulped. We're done with the first third? He offered weakly. Himiko took a deep breath and calmed down. Stabbing Izuku now wouldn't do, but reserving the pent-up aggression to the next poor sob that tried to gut them sure would. Izuku's luck was that there was a lamp right after the undead giant so they could go back to the hunter's dream. They upgraded their weapons and channeled power from the blood, and Himiko had time to drink some blood and calm down. After that, they returned to the dungeon and pressed on. The second floor was cleared and then they faced a trio of big and fat monsters, one that was clearly the chief of the other two. Once more Izuku thought that a group of 3 was the magic number for the hunt, but even at a numeric disadvantage, they made do. The plan to face those merciless watchers and their chieftain was simple. Himiko kept the one watcher and the chieftain occupied with a merry goose chase, both only having melee options to attack and being slower than the girl by a large margin, while Izuku dealt with the watcher with a gun. As it was only carrying a long-range weapon, it was easy for Izuku to outmaneuver and slay the disfigured monster. That finished, he engaged the chieftain while Himiko turned on the other watcher, and both made quick work of them. The second main enemy of the dungeon being easier than the first was strange, but it helped improve the mood of the 2 young hunters. They pressed on because they had no reason to go back to the dream. The third floor was the hardest compared to the others, but also the most rewarding. Not only had they accumulated a nice stock of blood echoes and materials to better their arsenal, including some blood gems. The gems were as strange as all the rest of Yamam and just as macabre, but in simple terms, they were a coalition of blood that could be inserted into weapons with a special tool, a tool Izuku found after his battle with Gascoin. He still loathed to think about that, his greatest mistake, but Izuku didn't have the luxury of being picky with his tools if he wanted to progress. Back to the blood gems. Once inserted, the gem would strengthen the weapon with its power, as if the steel it was grafted was organic and could benefit from it. At that point, Izuku stopped trying to make sense of things, but again, Quirks could tell the laws of physics to take a hike, so it wasn't that hard to ignore the impossibilities and focus on the applications. Now, with both their weapons stronger and their always increasing combat experience, the two hunters forged their way into the deepest sanctum of the Thumeru Chalice dungeon. In the last door on the furthest hallway, a single message warned them, "Beware the watchdog of the old lords." Opening it, they were greeted by a large room. Inside, they found yet another great beast to hunt. Himiko chuckled. After all that, a big doggo isn't the worst thing we could find. She looked over the colossal canine creature ahead, not too impressed after what they faced in their hunt to date. As if angered by the girl's comment, the dog heated up, literally. In a moment, the watchdog ignited in a blazing inferno, howling not in pain but rage. "I spoke too soon," the blonde said, laughing merely. The crap Yamam threw at them was always horrible, so the least she could do was laugh at it. She was sure All Might would approve. She had to ask him next time. Izuku, who had taken the time his partner used to talk to activate his power cloak again, seeing the room had more than enough space for him to move, shouted, "Keep away from it. You're carrying too much volatile stuff to risk getting set on fire." "What, you think I'm not hot enough, Himiko?" The girl laughed as Izuku forced himself not to blush a storm. Taking a running start, the young hunter threw himself at the watchdog. The good news was that he could hit it with only minimal discomfort from the flames. The bad was that the flaming canine would breathe a stream of fire, explode in a blaze and throw its bulk around with frantic fury. Himiko for her part shot the dog's head and legs to try tripping it, and to be fair she succeeded once, but that was the worst match for her. The girl couldn't get close, couldn't use her molotovs, the watchdog was already on fire and she doubted it would bother with more, and her bullets weren't being very effective, to say the least. She also didn't have a quirk that made her super strong and fast. Himiko wasn't that lucky, her power only gave her trouble, and even now it was useless. She could only transform into things she drank the blood off, and what would that help? Oh, bloody hell. She was sure this term was somehow referring to Yamam. Himiko was stupid. Actually, she was double stupid. Not just she never thought of using her quirk after drinking the blood from the vials, which she was pretty sure came from the beasts of the city, but she also had never gone over it with Izuku. The boy was an angel, of course. He wouldn't ask if he thought it made her uncomfortable, and her stupid airhead never thought that maybe informing the smartest people she knew. The shields were nice, but she was a firm believer that Izuku was better, that, hey, she had a blood quirk that was actually useful in that horror show of a city. Just as Himiko was about to keep kicking herself over it, Izuku got swatted aside by the watchdog. The boy was sent head over heels, tumbling through the floor until ultimately hitting the wall of the decrepit arena. Help first, whine later, Himiko decided. Taking aim with her pistol, she sought the canine in the eye. "Hey, doggy. Mess with someone your own size." Her taunt worked. Now here was hoping her idea did too. Himiko's quirk was weird, not only by other people's definition but because she found it kinda wonky. It was like there was a list in her head with what blood she drank, how much, and from who. Finally, paying attention to it let her know that yes, there was a bunch of blood from the beasts of Yamam inside, there was a bit from Izuku too, from the time they met, and there was also something else. She couldn't identify what. It was like trying to read a language she didn't know or identify a face on a low-resolution picture. Not important. She skimmed through it in search of something big, strong, and preferably fire-resistant. Thankfully, she found it, and the irony wasn't lost on her. The first thing she turned into from that damn city was the same thing that gave her her first death. Himiko's form was covered in a reddish substance, something that surprised her. Her quirk was different, it felt different, but the end result was much the same. Himiko turned into one of Yamam's brute giants in a wave of bloody clay, down to the last detail, including its strength. With an overhead swing of her cleaver that was now small in her hand, the girl drove her blade into the watchdog's head before it could run her over. Without letting her enemy recover from the shock and pain it felt, Himiko brought the cleaver up and down again and again. The rush was so strong, and the delicious smell of blood all around her called to the young huntress. As suddenly as it started, it ended. Her transformation fell apart when the stock for that form ended in a shower of dead blood. Himiko blinked blankly at the stale and dark red rivers that dropped to the floor and formed a quickly growing puddle. She had used her quirk, right? What for? Her head was fuzzy as if someone had filled it with cotton. Why was there so much blood on the ground? And why did it smell so bad? It was her blood, right? Then why did it smell like death? Was she dead? Something was in front of her. What was it? She knew what it was, but she couldn't remember. Her vision was blurry. Where was Izuku? Himiko was feeling bad. She had to find Izuku. He would make her feel good again. He always did. Even when she felt like curling into a ball on a corner and dying. She didn't want to die. It was scary. Where was Izuku? Himiko was scared. Was she alone again? The thing in front of her finished getting up and opening its mouth. Was it its mouth? There was something hot and red coming from it. Something green and shiny entered her unfocused vision. She liked green. It was becoming her favorite color since the person she liked most in the world had a lot of green. It got brighter and closer, and Himiko was picked up. She felt warm. Was it okay to sleep now? Just a bit? She was so tired. Himiko closed her eyes and blackness swallowed her mind. Izuku gently put Himiko down, making her lean on one of the walls of the tomb they were trapped with the beast. No, where it was trapped with him. You know, I hate being angry. Izuku's voice was calm and icy. His tone lower. The boy felt disconnected from the situation as if he was just a passenger on his own body. But I hate things like you more. It was like he was reciting the words from somewhere. You destroy everything you touch. And why? The great reason for all this is as pathetic as you. The next words to come out of his mouth would forever have a place in the dark corner of his mind where all his worst nightmares lived. The power of one for all roared in his ears, coating his very being in power. With his voice echoing. Or was there an echo to it? He finished. You destroy because it is your nature. But that is fine, it is my nature to make things like you bleed. The watchdog of the old lords, a fearsome beast burning with furious power, shivered. The being before it, the hunter, the monster, lit up with its own wrathful might. Before, the cloak was composed of viridescent arcs of lightning, illuminating even the departments of that ancient tomb with a hopeful, if haunted, glow. Now what escaped the ruby veins of the hunter was a storm of cerulean blue plasma that flew in all directions as if propelled by its host's fury. The hunter drew his gun in a blink, pulled the trigger, and started the second round of their battle with a brutal bang. The barrel spat the quicksilver in a burst of plasma, the pellets from the blunderbuss accelerating at match speed and digging deep in the beast's flesh with their blue light. The watchdog recoiled with a pained whine. Each projectile had such speed that they felt like spears drilling into it. In a flash, the hunter capitalized on the opening he had created by dashing at the beast and driving his sword between its ribs. He had abandoned the hammer's head beside the unconscious girl in favor of the faster weapon and wielded it with masterful and merciless efficiency. The watchdog opened its maw, intending to spill a wave of flames to destroy its enemy, only for a violent kick to close it shut and send its head snapping back. The accumulated fire didn't have where to go, making the pressure build up until violently exploding out. The hunter was but a blur in the arena, which had turned into a slaughterhouse. Flashes of cerulean were accompanied by the sound of air parted by a silver edge and followed by the frantic cries of a monster that found its natural predator. A man with a feral desire to end it slowly and painfully, playing with his prey, was what brought the watchdog of the old lords to its knees. The hunter approached his foe slowly, dragging his sword's tip on the floor, the sound grating at the beast's ears. Don't worry, mutt. The echo-y voice of the hunter sounded as sharp as his blade, as furious as the power trashing over his form. I'm sure that whatever hell you'll end up. The hunter raised his blade, eyes glowing cerulean blue, and gazed with disgust at the watchdog. Will be better than what I want to do with you. The blade fell. Izuku was drowning. No, that would mean he could breathe in the first place. Everything below his eyes was a numb void, bare of even the cold chill of death. He tried opening his eyes, but his vision was blurry, tears and blood making it impossible to discern what was in front of him. A voice reached his ears. It was familiar, not one he had heard before. He tried to turn his head to the source of the voice, but he couldn't. His neck hurt. Where was he? Izuku felt his eyelids turn heavy. Another voice came from just ahead. He hated the devil that voice belonged to. The first voice broke through the fog in his mind. Wake up. Izuku's eyes flew open. He quickly looked from side to side, seeing he was in a desolate landscape. There was blood on the ground, and the sky was clouded by thick black clouds, making a picturesque image that perfectly depicted what Izuku imagined hell looked like. Far ahead, someone waved frantically to Izuku, too far away for the boy to see their features clearly. "You have to wake up, little nine. We can't hold him for long." The figure's voice, masculine and youthful, serene and steady, had a tone of frantic panic to it, like an adult that didn't want to scare a child but needed them to obey for their own good. Izuku blinked, his eyes the only part of his body that seemed to follow his orders. Who was that? Who are we? Who are they holding back, and why? And most important, what was behind him? In the hunt, Izuku faced many situations that made his heartbeat shoot up with all the fear, anger, and panic he felt, but for the first time in his short and painful life, it completely stopped from the absolute dread that filled him. Something grasped Izuku, his whole body having the experience of being manhandled like a toy by a demented child firsthand. It hurt so much. Izuku could hear his bones creaking, the pressure too much for them to hold against the invisible hold that engulfed his body and squeezed. Izuku woke up with a scream, sitting up and holding himself with bloodied hands. He frantically looked from side to side, moving his head exaggeratedly to make sure he could, that his neck still worked, that he was still alive. Close to him, looking like an industrial blender had spatted after going to town on the poor thing, the watchdog of the old lords laid motionless. Its head was chopped clean off. The boy quickly put it out of his mind after seeing it was dead. Instead, he desperately searched for his partner in the accursed hunt. Izuku let out a strangled yelp when his eyes found Himiko propped against a wall, motionless and covered in foul-smelling blood. He shot to his feet with a stumble and rushed to her side, fear gripping his heart and squeezing just like don't think about it. A logical and rational part of his mind reminded him that in the worst-case scenario, Himiko would appear beside the last lamp they found no worse for wear. The highly emotional part of him that almost burst into tears every time Nicola and Eri looked sad, that nearly broke down every time his mother seemed worried, and that nearly was crushed down by guilt every time Himiko got hurt in the hellish nightmare. All his damn fault. Kindly told it to shut up in a tone similar to a distressed animal. In a second that took too long, Izuku slid beside Himiko and checked her pulse. To his absolute relief, she was peacefully sleeping, completely unhurt. He permitted himself 1 second to cry, then Izuku grabbed both their things, picked Himiko in a bridal carry, and marched to the last door of the dungeon. Izuku could already see a new chalice there, which meant that all that wasn't for nothing. After snatching it, he kept going. His thoughts became more and more chaotic at each step, the cacophony of self-depreciation, guilt, fear, and despair reaching a crescendo, ultimately ending in burning hate. The boy that wished nothing more than to be a hero and help others cursed all the mad and degenerated animals that crawled through Yamam, be they the beasts that looked the part of the ones that pretended to be human. Be them the ones who enjoyed his current suffering or the ones who originated it by building that damned city. Izuku barely realized when he tripped on his own hate and back to the merciful embrace of the sun. What the hell happened? I don't know. You don't know? I don't know. I just wanted to kill that thing so bad. You're not the only one, Chief, but you don't see us doing whatever the fuck you did there. How did you even take the wheels like that? Don't look at me, I have no idea how that's even possible. Yeah, sure. Thanks for the vote of confidence, but I'm not an omniscient, all-knowing guru. Could have fooled me. Deep breaths, don't waste your time trying to murder them, we're already dead. And your scrawny ass would only get kicked for your troubles. Anyway. If someone feels a sudden and overwhelming urge to go on a homicidal rampage, then please tell us. Also, I'm not scrawny. Keep telling yourself that, but you're right. I'm always right. Don't push it. We can't know what that thing did to him, and to it. Better not tempt fate. All in favor of contacting Little Nine to warn him then? Aye. Okay, so let's figure out how the hell we'll do that. Toshinori couldn't stop pacing. He knew, on a factual level, that sending young Midoriya and young Toga back to Yamam was necessary to figure out how to not let that happen anymore. The man knew he had given Izuku an ace in case he ever found himself in a corner, having entrusted the boy one for all, and that the two teens would watch each other's backs. Still, a part of him felt horrible sending them into hell while he could only stay back and wait. Toshinori couldn't even help David and Melissa with all the science stuff they were doing, as he didn't even know what exactly that was. David was aggressively typing at a speed that would have given carpal tunnel to anyone with a different quirk, while Melissa was working on a machine Toshinori couldn't even identify, much less name. "If you keep pacing like that, you'll end up carving a trench on the floor," David called over his shoulder, never stopping his frantic typing. Toshinori didn't stop pacing. "I should have gone with them. That wouldn't have solved anything, Uncle might." Melissa followed her father's example and talked while somehow still doing whatever she was doing. "She's right. You have your time limit, which would have already expired by now." David checked the computer's clock, and yes, it was already 7 hours since Midoriya and Toga departed, much longer than Toshinori could keep his stronger form up. Toshinori knew that just as he knew exactly how much time had passed. He already had to call young Midoriya's mother and tell the poor woman that her son didn't have a set time to return home. He at least thanked his lucky stars for his clever idea of introducing himself as All Might's secretary to the woman when they had stopped by earlier that day. That led to some modicum of confidence on the woman's part, especially with David's shield there to assure the teens would be in good hands. The woman had almost fainted, which was fair. Now she was probably home with 2 small children, wondering if her son and other ward were fine. Nothing in that situation was fine, but damn if it didn't keep getting worse. Toshinori had made sure any blip of the Yakuza or its associates that popped on the radar would be brought to his attention immediately. He didn't like to throw his weight around like that, but the criminal organization had its sights on young Midoriya and Eri, so Toshinori had his conscience clear on that one. Even then, he had a big nothing to show for his troubles. At least he got Nicola refugee citizenship and both her and Eri on the protection service of his agency. The little girls would have financial support, something he was sure would help the Midoriyas' finances, and were legally put under him, even if Toshinori doubted he could take them away from young Midoriya even if he wanted to. The boy made him proud, even while politely threatening Toshinori. He hadn't called it that, but Toshinori knew when someone was willing to throw hands with him, and the boy was both willing and capable. Was that a sign of separation anxiety? Maybe. Guilt for his actions? Probably. He would try to get all the kids therapy after they were done with all the abducted to a nightmarish dimension shebang. "I got it." Melissa's sudden exclamation snapped Toshinori out of his thoughts. Both he and David quickly joined the girl beside the machine she had been working on. It was a cylindrical thing with a terminal at the side that was taller than Toshinori, with a glass in the center of what appeared to be a containment chamber. In it, a glob of mist that hurt his brain to just look at floated lazily. "What is that?" The one to answer him was David. "That is a sample of the exotic matter, or should we call it exotic energy? Forget it. It's the thing that the passage from here to Yamam is made of." That made sense. If they needed a way to block the stuff, the shields would need some of it to mess around with first. Even then, Toshinori found it distressing. "Is that thing safe?" Melissa turned to him, and Toshinori finally saw how worn out she looked. Her bloodshot eyes tiredly glared at him. "I spent the last hours making sure that, yes, it is safe, Uncle Might." The hero shrunk into himself in embarrassment. "Sorry." She sighed. "It's okay." She perked up a little. "Finally, some good news, huh?" Just as he was about to respond, Toshinori's phone rang. He checked the caller, and a smile graced his emaciated face. "You can say that again." "Young Midoriya is calling, so they got back," which was a massive relief. "See? Told you the boy could handle it." David patted Toshinori's shoulder as the blonde accepted the call. "Young Midoriya. Good to hear from you." Toshinori's happy greeting was cut short by his successor's distressed and frantic words. The boy was tripping over himself while simultaneously sounding panicked and furious. The latter was something Toshinori had never heard in his voice. "Slow down. What happened?" The shift in his tone, from the man Toshinori to the hero All Might, made the shields stop in their tracks and look at him worriedly. Toshinori listened patiently as young Midoriya took a deep breath and summarized what led to his current foul mood. He had to give the boy that. It was a good reason if nothing else. "Listen. Stay home, rest, and wait for me. I'm on my way." He waited for the boy's acceptance and parting words before hanging up and start making his way out. "Don't wait for me," he yelled back to the shields, already halfway out of the room. "Wait." Melissa rushed to his side. "I should go too. If something bad happened on the other side, it'd be better for someone with enough math to help be there." "But what about?" David cut his protest short. "I'll hold the fort. Go. Toshinori nodded, half to his honorary niece and half to his friend. Okay then, let's go. Himiko had a strange lot in life. When she was with her old family, which she only called that for reference's sake, Himiko had what was considered a normal and safe life, but she was miserable. Now, while she had just come out from a special kind of hell with a Victorian theme to it, after fighting, dying, and suffering a whole lot, Himiko was happy. Not for what she had to deal with in Yamam, but because she had a home to return to. And that was not in the sense of a place to stay, but one where there were people to come back to, people that liked her for her. Izuku, the ray of sunshine, had carried her back after her, honestly disastrous, attempt at using her quirk, and after they got off their dirty clothes, the duo was smothered with motherly love from Inko. That woman was also a ray of sunshine. Now here Himiko was, sitting on the couch with Eri and Nicola on her lap, half leaning, half laying on Izuku, and watching a magical girl anime with them. Or, at least, she and the girls were. Izuku had been on the phone with All Might earlier, and now he was angrily writing in his notebook. Speaking of the girls, Himiko was glad that they accepted her after she told her story of how Izuku saved her. The three of them instantly bonded with the common ground of their green hero, forming what was practically an unofficial fan club. Oh, Himiko should get them matching shirts. She knew she was trying to distract herself from the memory of drowning on her own quirk, but she was completely fine with that. Himiko was home, and she was safe. Izuku would make sure of that. The blonde patted the two heads of white on her lap and smiled. Everything was fine. Everything was better than before. She could handle a little pain if it meant she had a home to come back to. David scratched his head in complete bewilderment. He was a knowledgeable man, his PhDs could attest so, but he had no illusion of being all-knowing. Even then, he knew enough to, at least, not be lost on a subject for long. That wasn't the case here. The matter, energy, thing that was the byproduct of whatever Midoriya did to connect their dimension with the other one he periodically got trapped in was impossible to understand. Scratch that, it was impossible to exist. It didn't work on the normal rules of matter even while functioning as such. The same could be said for energy. It emitted a form of radiation that was a pain and a half to capitate on his sensors but somehow could interfere with them to the point he had to switch melted cables more than once. And that wasn't the worst part, not by far. David was used to violations of conventional laws of physics, he worked with quirks, but that thing was something else. It had its own set of rules, and it only cared for its own rules. The mist, which was as good a name as any, could interact with reality, but reality couldn't interact with it. That wasn't how things worked, but David decided to roll with it after breaking down and screaming for 5 minutes straight. With that settled, David decided to break out the big guns, which bore fruit. Dark matter could somewhat interact with it, which also wasn't how things worked, but he would take what he could get. The incredible results he had were more mist. That was it. The mist could somehow turn dark matter into more mist, and David had no idea how. First, that dark matter was hell to work with in the first place, as it didn't interact with normal matter itself, so he had to bring the gravity locks all the way from Island and bring some sensors that were the result of multiple quirks being used to create a piece of technology that bordered on witchery. Even then, mist ignored all of that and just did its own thing. It wasn't any identifiable process, for starters. There was no liberation of energy, dregs, or anything a normal alteration process caused. When the two entered into contact, then instantly, there was mist, whereas before, there was dark matter. Did that answer any questions? No, it just created more. However, it was a start, and David had done more with less. The man glared at the blob of mist on the dimensional lock. Another thing from my island that was a pain on the neck to bring over. Just you wait. I'm gonna crack you open and learn your secrets, you little rascal. When, not if, when I do. I'll free the kids from whatever cosmic tomfuckery you like to pull. David didn't like to swear, but he made a special exception for the mist. It could play hard to get, but the future of the next symbol of peace was on the line, and David swore not to let his friend's life work crumble. First, it had been his idea of a quirk enhancer, but that idea was long dead and buried. He had thought that the world wasn't ready to lose All Might, and it wasn't, but it didn't have to. Midoriya had shown David he and Toshi were cut from the same cloth. He could be a pillar like All Might was. But for that, he couldn't go dying in an other dimensional hell, so David had a duty to his friend and the world to ensure their pillar wouldn't crumble. David downed a mug of coffee in one go and cracked his neck. There was much to do and very little time, but David welcomed the challenge. After all, he did more with less. Eri glanced at Nicola, who met Eri's ruby eyes with her own. Both girls didn't know how to speak with each other. Izuku had explained that it was because they didn't speak the same language, but they could make do with drawings and looks. The one they traded told the other how worried they were. Izuku was angry. Not at them or at Toshinori and the girl that came with him, but he was. They tried to ask, but he shook himself and said he was fine. Neither Eri nor Nicola believed him. They knew angry men, bad men, and their good hunter wasn't like that. He never hurt them, never yelled at them, and tried his hardest to be there for them. Even then, even when he was their hero, he was still a man. Eri and Nicola knew he made mistakes, and they could see how scared he was, even if Eri didn't know why. Nicola had tried to explain, but that didn't help. Still, Eri knew Izuku felt down from time to time, but she had never seen him angry. It wasn't like with the Birdman, where he hurt her when he was angry. No, Izuku hurt himself. Nicola saw when he clenched his hand so hard it bled, and Eri didn't tell anyone, but she saw Izuku punching his leg while he was searching for something in his bedroom. More like their bedroom as only Nicola and her used it. Eri wanted it to stop. She didn't like to see Izuku hurting himself. She didn't like to see him angry. Izuku wasn't angry. No, he went beyond that already. He was furious. It was his idea to dive into the tombs under Yamam. After all, why not go spelunking on a hellhole in a place that was already a hellhole? And what did he get for that? Himiko hurt herself using her quirk to save him from being chewed by a house-sized dog. It was his mistake, and she was the one who paid for it. Of course, there was also the little episode he had, but Izuku didn't know what, why, and how, so he would shelf that for later. Preferably never. He had enough problems on his plate. And now he had to try to appear like he wasn't about to keel over or murder someone. Now he got why Himiko said she liked to stab people she didn't like. Izuku had half a mind to run himself through his sword a couple of times. A hand landed on his shoulder. Young Midoriya. Izuku looked up at All Might and realized he was spacing out again. Sorry, just thinking about some things. He tried to brush off All Might's concern. He didn't deserve it. For all the good it did. Himiko unknowingly came to his rescue, poking his cheek with a pout. If that is about the church guy, the answer is no. Church guy? Melissa asked with a head tilt, looking away from her PDA for the first time since she started to note down everything they could recall from their latest tenure in Yamam. Himiko's pout intensified. This weirdo from the healing church we found. He kept going on and on about the vile bloods, and how they were a plague as if there weren't beasts crawling around everywhere. She crossed her arms and looked aside. If it weren't because we needed help with the goop dog, then we would have stayed as far away from him as we could. Izuku felt the need to at least try to defend the man who assisted them in their time of crisis. Alfred wasn't that bad. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have beaten the blood-starved beast. He didn't notice how the names sent a shiver down all the blonde spines. Himiko growled under her breath, "Stupid goop." She turned to him and put a finger directly on his face, and he didn't even help that much. You ended up breaking your bones again. Izuku put his hands up in surrender. I still need to get the hang of my technique. You better. All Might interrupted their bickering with a cough, which made him spit a little blood. Speaking of, you should come up with a name for it. The demonstration they got showed how awe-inspiring Izuku's manifestation of One for All Us was, and Toshinori felt it deserved a proper name. He has a point. Himiko held her chin and tilted her head from side to side. I can't keep calling it, lightning thingy, in my head all the time. It's lame. We can brainstorm some ideas later. How are things going on this side? Did you guys have a way of stopping the transition from here to there? Izuku's voice was close to cracking by the end of his sentence. Himiko also perked up, turning to Melissa. The girl took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. We got a safe sample of the substance the dimensional transitions produces, or that causes it in the first place, and my dad is looking at it right now. I can't promise you anything yet, but we are working on it. Himiko slumped on Izuku's side, not afraid of throwing all her weight on him. I didn't get half of that, but thanks. Izuku nodded. Yes, thank you for all the help you're offering us. Melissa smiled. Hey, it's why I became a scientist and support technician in the first place, to save the ones that save others. The two young hunters responded with their own smiles. A sniff broke the trio's little moment. They turned to All Might to see the man drying his tears with a handkerchief. They grow up so fast. The teens shared glances before breaking down laughing. The merry atmosphere helped Izuku to push the cloud of anger that clung to his skin like sludge away. He wasn't enough, but he also wasn't alone, so Izuku only needed to hang on a little more, and everything would be fine. 4 days. It had been 4 days since their last trip to Yamam. And nothing changed. There was no headway by the shields on their research of the mist, no news on the Yakuza by All Might, and Izuku had made almost no progress on his use of Hunter's Cowl, the name of his technique decided after his first suggestion was rejected. Izuku still thought full cowling was a good name, but Himiko and Melissa disagreed and he had to make some concessions. If that wasn't enough, he still had no idea why and what happened on the tail end of his fight with the Watchdog of the Old Lords, but at least he was fine in putting that off his mind. Did the silver lining help Izuku's sleep-deprived brain not spiral into dark lines of thoughts that only left him more irritable? No, but there was nothing he could do about it. DEKU. And the blonde yelling at his face sure wasn't helping. Izuku looked slightly down at Bakugo, both for their height difference. The last channeling of blood echoes left Izuku standing at a respectful 180 and for the bomber's usual anger at his mere existence. He usually would have folded like paper and let Bakugo shout until he was satisfied. Still, Izuku was tired, and in desperate need of coffee, so he just turned away and left the gradually emptying classroom. The young hunter reached the middle of a hallway when something grabbed his arm and turned him around. "Did you hear me, DEKU?" The boy's only answer to Bakugo was to blink slowly, struggling to keep his heavy eyelids up. 4 days seemed to be Izuku's current limit of how long he could go before his mental faculties started to take a blow from sleep deprivation. He could see Bakugo's mouth moving, but his ears felt as if full of cotton, along with the rest of his head. The telltale pops of explosives got through him, and Izuku blinked as his mind focused on the present. Izuku had his blunderbuss in his hand, the gun's barrel pressed against Bakugo's chest. The boy, and the hallway, had gone deadly silent, with all the students staring at Izuku with wide eyes. He realized what the situation meant, but the only thought passing through his head was, "Now I feel like a hypocrite for calling Himiko out that time on the beach." Stopping to think about it, Eileen sensei also greeted Izuku by holding him at gunpoint, so maybe it was a hunter thing? "What the fuck, DEKU?" The shock and growing anger in Bakugo's tone told Izuku how the next 20 minutes would play out if he didn't get out of there right now. He dropped the blunderbuss, letting the messengers do their thing. The second wave of shock that went through the people in the hallway was Izuku's cue to make his escape. Having only crashed into 4 people on his way out, Izuku successfully left Aldera behind. He would probably be hearing more about that little altercation later, but for now, Izuku just wanted to go back home before he accidentally shot someone for real. Himiko's jaw-cracking yawn only made her feel worse. She was so tired she felt nauseous, and on top of that, she was alone at home now. Inko had to take Eri and Nicola to All Might's agency for some paperwork thingy that Himiko didn't have the brainpower to understand or care about. The girl curled on the couch and tried to keep her tired eyes on the movie on the TV, only to give up and stand slowly. She needed to do something, or she would slip. Mamadori had given her some quick cooking lessons in case Himiko needed to prepare something for herself or the girls, so maybe she could get an early start on dinner. Himiko opened all the wrong cabinets before finally finding the rice cooker, then did the same thing looking for a frying pan to make some scrambled eggs. That was why she let Izuku organize their things. He always put their supplies in a neat way that was intuitive to grab in a pickle. The blonde giggled, remembering when she tried to leave the Molotovs and blood vials in the same pocket, and the boy almost had an aneurysm. Himiko admitted she could see herself smashing a Molotov on her leg in panic, which was the exact argument Izuku used to explain why it was a horrible idea. Hey, maybe someday they will look back and laugh at their time in Yamam. Like those old military guys who got together to talk about their terrible memories and find it funny. Probably not, but she could hope, and wasn't that a novel experience? Himiko realized she had stayed inside her head for too long when the smell of burnt eggs hit her nostrils like a werewolf on fire. Well, practice makes perfect. She discarded the failed egg and grabbed another. Focusing on her second try helped Himiko deal with the creeping sleepiness that weighed heavily on her, but more than that, the feeling of actually doing something for the people she cared for warmed her heart some. After so many chilling nights wandering through cold and dark alleys, both the ones from Japanese cities and the ones of the decrepit Yamam. Any source of warmth and comfort was something Himiko valued more than gold. The green lightning over Izuku's form trashed around as he tried to contain it. The boy had a sudden thought born from desperation for his lack of progress and tiredness from his multiple days awake. If trying to use more of one for all wasn't working, how about less? Maybe that way, his pathetic control of the quirk wouldn't slip so easily, and if he got used to it, he could avoid his hunter's cowl fading after every distraction. With that in mind, Izuku tried to limit the output of energy, but that's when he ran into another problem. He needed to consciously concentrate on maintaining the low power, or it would jump back to the usual amount. That made his idea completely useless. He thought he wouldn't need to pay as much attention with a smaller portion of the quirk, which was the whole point of trying it, not more. Izuku realized he shouted in frustration the second his fist made contact with a rusted washing machine. The appliance was torn apart by his attack, along with the skin on his knuckles. Strangling down a curse, Izuku looked at the damage his momentary lapse of control caused. Surprisingly, it was less than he expected. He felt his power jumping to at least the upper 20% at that moment, but none of his fingers were broken, and the superficial damage was negligible, just some band-aids and it should be good by the next day. Maybe all the blood echoes he channeled helped him with one for all? That or... Izuku stopped his train of thought before it could go back to his battle massacre of the Watchdog of the Old Lords. Whatever that was, it couldn't mean anything, right? The boy kicked the scraps of the machine he so brutally destroyed and turned away. He needed to get the hang of All Might's quirk. He needed to do something right. I have an idea. Melissa's sudden exclamation almost made David drop his coffee. They were in his Boward lab, having restarted their research on the mist after a break for some R&R after an accident where David almost opened the hazard container's lock. Now with some hours of sleep and a fresh head, Melissa was struck by a bout of inspiration. Her father carefully put his mug down. Okay, let's hear it. We already established that the mist works as a door in this situation. Melissa began to explain her logic to him, guiding David through her train of thought. It opens, Izuku and Himiko pass through it, and then it closes. Yes, we got that verified. David was with her so far. The problem is, the door locks when it closes, and we don't know how Izuku opens it from his side. Melissa saw her dad nod and wave his hands, telling her to go to the point and not leave him hanging. But what if we don't let the door close? With that, maybe Izuku could come back right away. David raised his finger, then lowered it and considered her idea. He hummed while scratching his jaw. It isn't a definitive solution, but it is something. We probably will need to stabilize the transition space, so it doesn't fail halfway and somehow close the portal after so nothing else crosses to our side, but it can work. Melissa shared a grin with her father. He was officially on board with the idea. I'll go grab the frequency tuners. She turned and power walked to the storage room, beyond herself in joy for contributing. And the vacuum chamber too. I don't want that thing trying anything funny. David's complaint and stink eye at the mist got a laugh out of Melissa. She hurried her steps, pushed forth by the thought of things finally turning up for her new friends. Things had officially taken a turn for the worse when Izuku got home. Sorry. Izuku sighed and mustered the energy to smile at Himiko. It's fine. Hey, I was going to crash if you didn't. Himiko looked down at her cleaver and went back to morosely sharpen the blade. The blonde had been at the end of her rope, trying to remain awake by doing anything she could think of. Then, Izuku got home, and they sat down to eat. Himiko could swear she had only blinked, but when her eyes opened, it was for a panicked Izuku shaking her awake in the hunter's dream. Of course, she fell asleep, and of course, Izuku knocked himself out to follow after her. Of course, Himiko messed up in the end, and Izuku had to clean it up. Izuku gently tapped her shoulder. Himiko turned to see him offering her some ammunition. I used a bit of the blood echoes I got from the Watchdog to restock. The boy explained while fumbling with his own bullets. Funny how he got taller with the power-ups but was still just as adorably awkward as before. The stray thought led Himiko to have an idea to help Izuku with his bone-breaking problems, and maybe make up for her mess. Hey. Doll can make you buffer overall with blood echoes, and that should help with one for all, right? Izuku blinked confusedly before nodding slowly. I think so? The girl smiled, showing her fangs. So, maybe she can upgrade something to help with your control. Himiko's lips parted further, seeing Izuku's eyes blown wide, and the boy gasped in realization. Why didn't I think of that before? He yelled before turning back and rushing out of the workshop, stumbling down the stairs in search of the doll. Himiko giggled at his antics. She finished tending to her weapon and put the tools back in their proper place. No need to give the crazy old man a reason to be mad at them, before following along. Outside, the green-haired boy was kneeling before the doll, her hands glowing with the strange light of the channeling ceremony. Izuku finished spending the last of his blood echoes and stood up. The first difference he noticed was how his brain felt, tingly. It was as if his thoughts caused static to fill his head. The second was how colors felt more vivid. The yellow of Himiko's eyes seemed to glow brighter as the girl approached him. The pale white flowers of the dream looked like flakes of the moon itself. Your power grows, good hunter. The doll's placid tone matched her almost expressionless face, but the subtle undertone of care and the soft turn of her lips in what a generous person could call a smile betrayed her true thoughts. It will serve you well in the hunt. Himiko hopped between them and hooked her arms with the doll and Izuku's. Okay, what did I miss? The porcelain resident of the dream turned her slightest of smiles to the girl. By using the blood echoes to strengthen his arcane attribute, the good hunter hopes to attain more control of his own techniques. Not only his inherent skill can benefit from the blood, yours too can grow if you remain improving your blood tinge. Himiko's grin turned a little brittle. I don't think that's a good idea. Last time I used my quirk, I just made a mess of myself. Izuku frowned. He didn't want Himiko to get hurt, but this was our quirk. It was a part of her that the girl shouldn't cast away, for it would only hurt her in the end. Me too. I broke more bones trying to use on my quirk than not. He made a quick save of his slip, throwing a glance at the doll before continuing. She was one of the very few people on Yamam. Was the dream even part of Yamam? That cared for them, but One for All was a secret, and the more people who knew about One, the harder it was to keep it a secret. If improving my arcane attribute can help me not turn my bones into powder, then nothing fairer than you doing the same with your blood tinge to help with your quirk. Himiko didn't look very convinced. I don't know. My quirk only serves to screw me over. Seeing she was getting uncomfortable, Izuku decided to shelve the discussion for later. Think about it. For now, do you want to help me test if the investment was worth it? That made her perk up. Sure. I have to keep an eye on you in case you try to turn your arms into meat noodles again. Himiko giggled at Izuku's indignant face and doubled over when even the ever-stoic doll did the same. Izuku sighed, blushing in embarrassment. Better for them to be laughing at him than moping about. Izuku finally had something to show for his troubles. After many tests to guarantee it wasn't a fluke, the boy could ascertain that his control of up to 15% of One for All was solid. He could even push it to 17 if he had a moment to ensure he wouldn't fumble it. Such a solid improvement not only helped with their chances of survival but also helped Izuku with his recent foul mood. Was he happy with himself? Never, not fully. But at least he had hope of stopping being a failure, and that was good enough. Now stocked, armed, and as ready as they could reasonably be, the duo of hunters returned to Odon Chapel, the safe haven filled to the brim with incense to keep away the beasts, and with some people the teens had sent there to escape the horrors lurking on the streets, to continue with their track through Yamam. At least it was the plan until Himiko got sidetracked. Wasn't that door closed before? The girl pointed to one of the little haven's doors. Izuku also remembered it being locked shut the last time they were there, so someone must have opened it. You think we should check it? Himiko shrugged. Not like I want to go back outside. Maybe we can find something useful. As good an argument as any, Izuku nodded and took point as the vanguard, Himiko silently falling into position at his back to help without getting in the way. The girl commented how they were getting good at working together more than one time, and Izuku would like to agree as if he was good at anything. Just as Izuku crossed the door, he spotted a slip of paper on the floor. Picking it up, he saw it was a folded note. Inside, in slightly scratchy handwriting was, to Izuku's absolute shock, kanjis. True heroes never falter. Did you drop that? Himiko asked, having perched herself on Izuku's back to look over his shoulder. That's not mine. Izuku's blank whisper made the girl gasp. They traded an equally shocked glance. Who wrote that? And was that person in the same situation as them? Come on. Maybe we can still find whoever made this. Izuku didn't waste a second to pocket the note and dash ahead, Himiko hot in his heels. That was a mistake he would regret. In his hurry, Izuku followed the path to an elevator and went up, to stand before one of the many towers looming over the city. It wasn't empty. More of Yamam's mad residents took control of the tower, and they were not happy to see the foreign hunters. 2 armed men on the 2nd floor, on what should be a balcony if the tower wasn't so dilapidated, the exterior parts were basically falling apart one over the other, shot them. Izuku powered his hunter cowl just in time to use his Kirkhammer's head as a shield. Say what you want about Alfred. The executioner did give Izuku some good ideas and tips, even if unknowingly. The boy took a deep breath and leapt at the shooters. The power overflowing in him made reaching the balcony easy, and his new control made actually getting to where he wanted and landing possible. Quickly dealing with the enemies with a swing of his weapon that sent their broken bodies flying over the edge, Izuku gave himself a single second to enjoy his victory. Maybe he wasn't a complete failure. The moment passed, and he looked down to see Himiko entering the 1st floor. Let's try to surround whatever else is in here. I go down, you go up, and we meet in the middle. Fine by me. Just be careful not to have that happening to you. The girl shouted back a warning before the sounds of guns going off started. Izuku started on his part, sneaking a peek over his shoulders just to be sure. Himiko wouldn't ever let him live down if he got caught by his own plan. He would also probably not live, period, if that happened. Izuku turned the 1st corner and had to duck a wild swing of an axe instantly. The infected madman roared at the boy, only to get a lightning-cloaked fist to the face. Ignoring the filing of bones crumbling under his hand, Izuku followed his offensive with a vertical swing of his hammer. Thanks to One for All, the weapon felt almost weightless in his grip, but Izuku underestimated just how big of a difference it made. The hammerhead did not even slow down while turning the madman's body into powder, or when it went straight through the unstable floor. Oh no! Izuku barely had time to say before the ground under his feet crumbled, letting him plummet for a terrifying second. By sheer luck, he landed on a somewhat intact piece of the 1st floor balcony. That was the end of the good news. Waiting for him down under was a trio of Yamamites with weapons drawn. Izuku learned from his most recent mistake and switched his Kirkhammer to sword form. He parried a cutlass and sidestepped a bullet that grazed his arm. The 3rd enemy tried to circle the hunter and attack him from behind, only for a quicksilver round to go into his head from one side and out the other. What happened to the plan? Himiko asked, shooting Izuku a wink and the madman a couple more bullets. His incompetence happened. I smashed the floor a little too hard. All Might would be proud. Himiko punctuated her snarky comment by kicking one of the enemies in the chest, sending it to a waiting Izuku, who didn't wait to chop it in half. Yamam really messed him up if killing what was once a person so brutally didn't make Izuku flinch. Alakablam. Himiko's comical shout was punctuated by the last enemy's head splattering on the wall with a well-placed bullet. Really? Himiko huffed, don't judge me. Izuku raised his arms in surrender, I'm not judging. It's just that, really? Shush. Okay. He chuckled, slightly hysterical from the adrenaline pumping through his system. He took a deep breath to settle his nerves and let it out slowly. Okay. New plan. Izuku's grip on his sword tightened. We go together, carefully, and hopefully without any more mishaps. Fine by me. Himiko retook her place at Izuku's rearguard, ready to offer more ranged support. Hey, I know you like your hammer, but we should get you another weapon for when smashing isn't that good of an option, right? The young hunters started to make their way up the tower. Izuku considered her words and nodded. I think so too. Getting a secondary weapon would be good for both of us. Something that could cover the glaring weaknesses of their combat styles. That too, but something like a big sword would be cool for you to use when we have to worry about breaking walls and bringing a building on our heads. Himiko clarified. You can use One for All to go glowy and strong, so you better use it. It's just a case of collateral damage. The surprisingly insightful line of thought from Himiko made Izuku pause. She was right, he had a power now, something he could use not only by itself but to help him play to his new strengths too. The boy just confirmed he could swing a humongous weapon with ease, too much ease. Not NLY that, but he was just as fast as he was strong, with some slight discrepancy that could be negligible seeing the numbers he was working with. An idea started to form in Izuku's head, a very interesting idea. If there was one thing he could do right, just one, then he wouldn't be a failure. As if. He would need to check with the messengers to see if they would sell what he needed, or maybe with the shields to make the equipment for him, but his idea could work. It had to work. They kept exploring the tower in search of whoever left that note, fighting through groups of madmen, the occasional brute, and hurrying after the strange little beasts that carried bloodstones and fled at the first sign of danger. At each floor, their hope dwindled a little more, until they reached the last one. After dealing with an ambush, and after Izuku patched the bullet holes that a wheelchair-confined man with a damn Gatling gun, always the damn Gatling guns, put in Izuku's body, they were certain. There was no one there in the right mind to write a note. So, their little sidetracking was worthless like him, and they only lost time. Chest. Maybe not. Himiko dove to the wooden chest tucked in a corner of the room on the last floor, hidden from view by the bad illumination of the place, and wasted no time snapping it open. Her cat-like eyes widened. Oh, shiny. She grabbed the item which caught her attention. It was a medallion, the kind the messengers in the dreams somehow used to get new things to sell. Izuku noticed how it looked like the one that allowed him to buy his Quirk hammer. Maybe that was a sign his plan would work, or that he at least would get a more viable weapon for himself. Honestly, he was accepting any kind of good news these days. While the duo started to make their way down, a figure went unnoticed in the distance. Its only remarkable feature a ragged red scarf, like a bloody stain on the gray stone of the decrepit city. Izuku looked at his new weapon with a bright grin. His prayers were answered, and the medallion they found got the boy exactly what he wanted, and by how Himiko didn't bat an eye at the cost of it, she too liked how the universe approved of her earlier comment. Izuku shifted the great blade on his hands to gaze at the bright patterns running down its body. He still had the description of the weapon's body clear in his mind. Ludwig's holy blade. The healing church workshop began with Ludwig and departed from old Gehrman's technique to provide hunters with the means to fight more terrifying beasts, and perhaps things still worse. It is said that the silver sword was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the church. When transformed, it combines with its sheath to form a greatsword. Ominous, like most of the things in Yamam, but it also provided a glimpse of the city's history. Still, it was a steep price for it, costing all the two hunters shared economies. Even then, Izuku was armed with a better weapon that he could use to protect them better. He hoped with all he had, that it was enough. Izuku? Himiko's shy calling broke the boy from his musings. Yeah? He looked over his shoulder, his smile falling, seeing the awkward look on Himiko's face. What could cause her, of all people, to look like a berated child? So, you see, she fidgeted. Himiko fidgeted. Yeah? Izuku prompted again, getting anxious. I was looking at what else the messengers got to sell, just for fun, and, Himiko flinched, I found something. Izuku carefully placed his new weapon down, and this something is? The girl couldn't meet his eyes. It's a key we need to get to the church's part of the city. Well, it's more like a badge that you have to show at the gates, and, she trailed off. Izuku understood the problem. Himiko pushed him to buy Ludwig's holy blade and upgrade it the most they possibly could, and that left them broke. Still, they could probably scrunch up enough if they should back a few things. He told her just that. Instead of relief, her expression was filled with more pointed anxiety, like the one Izuku was starting to feel. No, we, can't. Izuku asked slowly, Himiko, how much does the key cost? His answer was a mumble he could barely hear. That didn't help with the pit steadily growing in his stomach. I didn't quite catch that. Himiko took a deep breath and huffed, screw it. She looked him directly in the eyes. It costs 10,000 blood echoes. Izuku deadpanned. Then he filled his lungs with something he only could do away from innocent ears like his mother's or the girl's. He cursed with all his being. Himiko couldn't stop wheezing. She just couldn't. Don't get her wrong. She still felt terrible from her mess involving their finances, but to hear Izuku, the cinnamon roll, curse like a sailor for 10 minutes straight, was just too much for the girl. They even got back home. Thankfully the shift broke Izuku from his swear spree before anyone else heard him. Everybody heard Himiko laughing until she ran out of breath and then laughed some more, and were all looking at her weirdly, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. To hear the ever-polite and awkward Izuku saying stuff that couldn't be repeated in public was just too much. Is she all right? Inko's only answer was an embarrassed mumble from her son. The boy hadn't looked anyone in the eyes since they got back. Better laughing than crying. Toshinori tried to reach for a silver lining, and he wasn't wrong. Compared to their earliest expeditions to Yamam, this one wasn't that bad. Izuku didn't seem to agree with Himiko's opinion. Can we please talk about something else? He wasn't proud of his outburst. he wasn't proud of himself in general. Sure. I have good news. Melissa and David might have a prototype up and running by tomorrow, the day after at the latest. The good news made the teens perk up. Finally, progress. Yay, we won't need to scavenge money for that stupid key. Himiko's cheer gained another round of stares. What key? Izuku decided to explain and not let the girl blame herself. We need a special badge to open the gate to the district we need to go to next. The problem is, it's really expensive and we used all our money already. He kept it simple. No pointing fingers and no delving into how the messenger's economy was built on spilled blood. Even while going through multiple research sprees through the archive of the workshop, Izuku was still no closer to truly understanding blood echoes. There was a certain logic, a grim one, in putting a value on things' heads and attributing it to who killed them. Bounty hunters were still a thing even in the modern age. Still, how the value of the bounty's blood was accounted for and tied to someone was a mystery to Izuku. When the doll performed the ceremony to make them stronger, both teens felt as if there was something over them that went in. Ugh, just thinking about it gave Izuku a headache. Inko didn't notice her son getting lost in thought, too busy revisiting memory lane. It's just like you to splurge too much on something you want. Remember when you used all your allowance to get a new All Might poster the day you got it? The air got a little lighter, something they all desperately needed after everything. Toshinori still had a question. What did you get that left you both completely broke? Izuku got a new sword. The old hammer wasn't being very useful, what with him breaking everything. Himiko poked some fun out of the boy before the chance slipped. Sorry, it's fine. You just needed something that wouldn't bring a building on our heads every time you swung it. She patted the boy's arm and the clearly visible muscle. His joke shirts were baggy, but they left Izuku's arms for show, and what a show it was with how his biceps were probably as big as Himiko's head. Not that you need help with that. Not with these guns. With her green bean successfully embarrassed, Himiko went back to laughing at his adorableness, which hid a foul mouth, and just the thought made her laugh harder. Leave the poor boy alone. Toshinori's attempt to defend him fell flat with how much the man was chuckling. Thankfully, said poor boy was saved by the doorbell. The reprieve was brief, as all that awaited him was a letter. A letter from his school principal. Izuku knew that each moment of his life that had that school or something related to it was anything but pleasant. It couldn't be that bad compared with what he faced now, right? Wrong. What? His shout instantly had Himiko at his side, gun in hand, and Toshinori not far behind. What happened? Are you okay? Himiko's voice didn't compute. Izuku's mind was too busy in the chaos that what he just read caused. Did he really think he could be a hero? Couldn't that damn school full of useless bastards stop stepping on his dream? I'm expelled. His tone was low but the words still rang like a gunshot. What? Let me see that. Inko grabbed the letter from her son's numb hands and started to read it aloud. Midoriya Inko, we with this letter come to inform you, the legal guardian of Midoriya Izuku, that he is expelled from Aldera Middle School on grounds of multiple incidents started by him as the aggravating party. The last account includes threatening a student with a weapon. The woman was completely frantic by the end. How could her son, her sweet boy, be accused of threatening someone? Did you finally tell those idiots to buzz off? Himiko thought it was high time for Izuku to stand up for himself. She was even willing to help him get rid of the bodies. Whoa. Back up a little. Toshinori, while also very shocked, tried to be the voice of reason. What the letter said didn't sound like his successor, but taking Himiko's comment into account, the story had more to it. What happened, kid? Izuku turned slowly to face his hero. His head felt full of static. All their fault. It was like he was watching himself from afar as his body went through the motions of explaining what happened. He should put them all down like the filth they are. I was trying to get back home. Bakugo tried to stop me, but when I didn't he started to set off his quirk. I was just so tired I reacted to the sound of explosives by holding him at gunpoint. Himiko nodded, being the only one not shocked. Makes sense. We learned it's always better to be ready to put some quicksilver rounds onto people threatening us. It only took one death for them to understand that being ready to shoot came before and after asking questions in any given situation. Damn crazy hunters, as if the beasts weren't bad enough. A heavy, weary sigh escaped Toshinori. Okay. Let's go in parts. He fixed both teens with a hard stare. I understand this was an outlier, but you two need to be more careful, or you will end up hurting someone. Still, this is partly my fault for not getting you two hooked on online classes when this started. Fewer chances of things going sideways, and that would let the kids do things on their own time. Not only that, but it would put Himiko back on track to finish her education. Oh well, hindsight was 2020. I'll make a couple calls, clear things up, and ask for some more help with this little misadventure. For now, sit tight and don't worry too much about it, I am here. Izuku felt things clear up a bit, his head not feeling as blurry. It was alright. Things would be alright. All Might was there. For how long? Rapa was getting sick of doing busy work. First, he was sent to walk around and search for the girl. Then he was sent to walk around and deliver messages as some damn courier. Don't those bastards have phones? Damn it, he just wanted to fight someone. Anyone. Now he had to go tell the bastard about what the other bastard wanted. What was it anyway? He reached the hallway to Overhaul's lab, already bored out of his mind when he heard it. Someone was speaking. Rapa got closer slowly to try eavesdropping, mostly for the heck of it. It was Overhaul, but he was talking too quietly for Rapa to hear. The brute used his footwork to walk closer to the lab's door with surprisingly silent steps, still trying to make out what was being said clearly. If not for the lack of other noises, Rapa doubted he would have heard it, but now close enough to the door, which was thankfully open to crack, he started to make out the words. She's gone. I need to find her. I need to finish my research. The cure. I need to find the cure. I need to. The mumbled words were all spoken slowly as if the person saying them was in a trance. Rapa was having a bad feeling. The type that crawled over the spine and gave goosebumps. Something was very, very wrong. He put his face to the open fillet of the door and peeked inside. Overhaul was kneeling in the middle of the room, which looked as if a tornado had swept over it. There was blood on the ground, a red stain that masked the floor tiles. Something moved. The blood seemed to gurgle as if boiling. Rapa felt his head hurt. Something spoke. The voice coming as if underwater. Rapa's nose felt wet. Find her, find the pale blood, find the marked one. Rapa turned and started to put distance between him and whatever the fuck that was. He saw enough horror movies to know where that was going, and he wasn't having any part in it, no sir. He wanted to die in a good fight, not for some stupid cult shit. Rapa ripped his mask off and rubbed away the blood flowing from his nose with the back of his hand. Whatever mess those bastards were getting into, he wasn't sticking around to see. Any clues? You asking that every 5 minutes doesn't help. Point. Can't you just go full murder hobo and take the wheels again? Stop with the murder hobo thing. I told you, I don't know how I did that. Kids, please focus. Sorry, I have an idea. Oh shit. If we can't go to him, why don't we bring him here? I mean, that could work, but how would we achieve that? Hear me out. When it pulls him, he's close to here. Close enough for us to try and, yoink. Wouldn't it throw a tantrum if we do that? Probably, but what other choice do we have? Am I the only one pissed off that all our options are bad ones? No, but we play with the cards we're handed. Toshinori had goofed up, he was mature enough to admit it. While he was running all over the place trying to help the kids with everything really, he forgot the more mundane things that they also would need a hand with. No, Toshinori didn't forget, he just thought they weren't as important, and while prioritizing their safety was necessary, that wasn't an excuse. He chose Izuku as his successor. It was Toshinori's duty to take care of him until the boy was ready to stand on his 2 feet and continue their legacy. That line of thought was what brought the hero to his old alma mater. In the years that passed since his tenure, UA had changed much, but the corridor to the principal's office was much the same. Even the old prickle of anxiety that accompanied walking through it was there. Thankfully, Toshinori wasn't worried about bad grades or a fight with a classmate. Unfortunately, his discussion would be much grimmer. Come on, get a grip. Young Midoriya and young Toga need something to help ground them, and their education is a fundamental part of their future. They will get through this, so do your part. With his little pep talk done, Toshinori stopped before the only door on the corridor and raised his hand to knock. The door opened on its own before Toshinori could touch it. Come on in. I had been waiting for you. The high-pitched tone who uttered those words sent the man's previous confidence running for the hills. Still, too late to back down now. With a last gulp, Toshinori braved inside the room. The office was pleasant, with the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating the whole room naturally and warming up the wood planks of the floor. The furniture was also mostly wooden, with only the chairs at the desk having steel legs to count for people whose mutations left them on the heavier side. The book trophy case that took the wall opposite the window was filled with old hard leather tomes and trinkets Toshinori couldn't identify. But all those things took a backseat to the presence of the principal himself. Sitting on his modified office chair was a being that left most of the world shocked and horrified in equal measure. What species of animal he was had turned into a gag after decades of no one finding the answer, but the bone-white pelt, cat-like tail, mouse-like head, and bear-like paws all were secondary. The characteristic that made it clear he wasn't human was the eyes. The beady, pitch-black eyes that pierced into the soul while betraying the mind behind them knew too much. Those were a constant reminder that Nezu wasn't human, but something that one day decided to join society for some unfathomable reason that none but Nezu himself knew. He had simply shown up one day, acquired Japanese citizenship the next, and managed to become the sole commanding force of the most prestigious school in Asia the following week. Not only that, Nezu had arranged a meeting with Toshinori that same month and pledged his cooperation in the man's crusade against his nemesis. To this day, Toshinori hadn't the foggiest idea of how Nezu had figured it out, about both one for all and all for one, but since the principal joined him, All Might hadn't lost a single battle in that war, until he won the war itself by ending that monster with his own hands. When Toshinori finally asked Nezu why do all that, he only stated that he was waiting for someone. Speaking of, you knew I would come to you. Nezu's facsimile of a smile still had too much teeth to it, and coupled with the situation it almost looked predatory. But of course. I had in fact believed that you would have sought my aid days ago, however, I believe that enlisting David Shield and his progeny was also a valid option. The principal tilted his head to the side slightly, beady eyes gleaming. That was one thing he hadn't missed about dealing with Nezu. The way the mysterious mammal always knew everything, even what should have been impossible for him to know, gave Toshinori goosebumps. Yes. Well, I now need your help. The smile widened just a tad, showing his fangs. Wonderful. I already have everything prepared to assist our fledgling hunters. Toshinori felt his blood run cold, just before he started to cough it up. What? How did you? Nezu passed him a handkerchief and waited for Toshinori to recompose himself. When the hero stopped coughing, the principal stared right into his eyes. Tell me, All Might, do you know where I got this? He tapped the space right under his right eye. Toshinori blinked. Where had that scar come from? There had been only perfect fur covering Nezu's hide in that place only a moment ago. The man blinked a slight headache away and examined the mark, noting how it wasn't a clean cut. The edges of the scar were jagged, with the skin at the borders being red as if chafed. Of course, Nezu spoke before Toshinori could, the question having been only a lead to his next words. I was young. Like any youngling, I simply didn't know best. The principal traced a short claw over the mark's edges, seemingly lost on another time and another place. For all intents and purposes, I should have perished. Instead, I was saved by a good hunter. The words seemed to tickle something in Toshinori's brain. Like the sudden feeling of missing a wordplay that you knew was there. Unlike others like his kin, that hunter knew to differentiate between beasts. Nezu continued his tale, not noticing or pretending to how the weird feeling hit Toshinori again. He simply let me go while others like him would have put me down without remorse. For many years I asked myself why, and when I finally divined the reason, what a monumental occasion had that been. He stopped tracing his scar and linked his pawns, beady eyes, for the first time that Toshinori could remember, shining with something definitely human in them. For you see, young ones are the only ones truly innocent. They have yet to grow into something not, and that same development can lead to infinite possibilities. Denying the young a chance to realize those possibilities is the same as abandoning hope that something different, something better might exist. Despite the emotional roller coaster, which hadn't stopped yet, Toshinori felt himself nodding. I understand, believe it or not. I also found someone that simply makes me feel like things can get better even after I'm gone. That's why I need your help, to make sure both of them, can also look forward to something. Yes. Keeping marching on is made much easier when you feel you are marching on to something, an invaluable idea in an environment such as Yamam. Why wasn't he surprised? I think you'll be more involved than I first thought. A cackle escaped Nezu, mirth dancing through his eyes. But of course. I commandeered this institution so I could offer young ones the same chance to develop to their full potential I was afforded. All might. It would be ungrateful of me to not, as the idiom says, pay the favor forward. Especially when we account for how I could help turn such promising fledglings into good hunters themselves. The feeling was so strong now that Toshinori had to hold the bridge of his nose. From how Nezu once again cackled, he not only knew why but also had deliberated done so for his own impish amusement. Oh, the sacrifices he made for good causes. Still, if someone could help them figure out what the hell was going on and how to help the kids, Toshinori was okay with a couple headaches. Both physical and metaphorical. Nomori Kayama, hero named Midnight, was many things. Hero, teacher, avid romantic, etc. However, she was not stupid. When Nezu calls for you, you drop everything and answer, after a second to panic appropriately. Her boss was many things that kept people awake at night in existential dread, but if he called for you specifically then one of two things happened. 1. You fucked up and are about to become painfully aware of said fact. 2. Something happened and he needs your particular set of skills to deal with it the best way possible. Either way, you don't keep the rat, God waiting. Nomori stopped in front of the door, raising her hand to knock by habit alone, as she knew it would open on its own. No one knew how it did that, as the door and wall were checked multiple times and no one found anything to explain how it did that, much less how Nezu knew the exact moment to open it. Excuse me, she trailed off, eyes widening at the sight of All Might, in all his muscular glory, sitting on a chair and nursing a cup of tea. Not only that, but by the way the man was massaging his temples he was probably also nursing a mean headache. Welcome, Midnight. Nezu greeted her by her hero name, so she wasn't in trouble, yet. Please take a seat, tea? Yes. Thank you. Nomori didn't say how she liked her tea since Nezu knew. Both from all the times he served her and because Nezu knew was a universal constant. Deciding to use the chance, Nomori turned to the hero beside her. Can I ask what the #1 hero of Japan is doing here? All Might gave her a strained smile. I came to ask help from an old friend. Let's go with that. But as Nezu is his usual self, I ended up with a bunch of questions and no answer to them. That's normal. No offense, sir. The unidentified animal brushed her concerns off, handing Nomori her cup exactly the way she liked it. Nezu then pulled a folder and laid it on his desk. To be clear, All Might, I only refuse to answer the questions you are not prepared to hear the answers. Back on topic, I called you here, Midnight, for among the staff, you are the one with most experience with shocked and traumatized victims. Any good mood Nomori had instantly evaporated. She took another sip of her tea, but it now tasted sour on her tongue. And you have one such victim that you need my help with handling? 2, in fact. Damn it. Nomori only had such a strong record with said cases because of her quirk, which could help sedate people without causing harm or adverse effects, but he hated using it to hurt people who were just scared. That led to her getting trained on how to deal with such situations without it. Nomori asked a lot of favors from a lot of people to make that happen. So now her quirk was a last option that she scarcely had to rely on in such scenarios. Even then, even when she made sure to be able to get things done in the best way possible, every time a desperate person looked at her in fear still haunted her thoughts. Still, Nomori was a hero, and helping people was her job. How can I help? Before you discuss that, I need you to sign this. Nezu tapped the folder, then put a pen over it. Nomori grabbed both objects and started to read over the non-disclosure contract she knew Nezu handcrafted for her. It was very, very thorough, and Nomori would be ruined if she broke it, but it was also extremely fair on its clauses, which was why she had no problem signing it like she did all the others. It wasn't the first time Nezu asked for her assistance as a hero, which was why Nomori knew what to expect. Perfect. Nezu gestured to All Might while putting away the signed contract. Seems like we're doing this. All Might let out a sigh. Was he smoking? As in literal smoke started to come out from his skin. I apologize for the scare I'm about to give you, but if you will work with us, this is necessary. And just like that, the monument that was All Might was gone. In his place, a skeleton of a man nodded at her. You might want to pick up your jaw. Nomori just noticed she was openly gapping. Her mouth closed with a click of teeth smashing together. I mean. Take your time. We will probably be here for a while either way. After 10 minutes, which was a big indicator of how shocked she was, Nomori calmed down enough to ask, "What happened to you? You should have seen the other guy. All Might." That stick figure was All Might. Chuckled for a moment, but his semblance quickly fell. "I was involved in a battle 5 years ago that left me like this." "Who could have done that to you? You're All Might. He won't be a problem anymore." His tone was enough to pass the message, and Nomori promptly dropped the subject. The man took a calming breath, it was shallow, too shallow, and proceeded to throw her worldview on its head. "Since that incident, I had been able to work less and less as a hero thanks to the extension of my injuries. Being down a lung and your whole stomach does that to you." Nomori hid her shudder pretty well, but she still felt cold inside knowing the strongest hero in the world had been going for years with less than all necessary organs. All Might kept speaking after a moment, so she probably didn't hide her discomfort that well. As was the case, I had become a little sour with how things would end with me like this. I can only maintain my strong form for 3 hours, and soon the world will have to keep going without me. The subject had suddenly become depressing and very real. A world without All Might was a thing Nomori hadn't known. She and everyone in her generation had been born in the era of peace that All Might had single-handedly created. For the first time since ever Nomori got confronted with the fact that said era would end, and looking at the emaciated man beside her, it would end soon. Luckily for the world, I found someone to take my place. To say she was getting dizzy with all the twists that conversation took would be an understatement. "You did?" "Yes." All Might laughed, not his usually bombastic one, but a small and genuine thing that seemed so relatable. He looked her in the eyes, his sunken azure orbs getting a hopeful glint to them. "Let me tell you a story of how a boy showed the greatest hero that there were people out there willing to do what's right even when the whole world is against them." Thanks for watching. If you loved this video, please spam read hearts in the comment.